Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and here's yet another Fun Ideas podcast. And I have a special returning guest. We've talked about Willy Wonka before on this show, and I think a long time ago we talked about something else, probably Hanna-Barbera. And on a different podcast, I did talk about Hong Kong Phooey with him recently, and it's now the 50th anniversary in 2024. So, hey, anyway, but we're not talking about any of that. We're actually going to talk about something that this man, Greg Ehrbar, has done some commentaries on the Rankin Bass Christmas specials.
Yay.
So, I guess reintroduce yourself, and then how did you get involved doing the commentary on this?
Well, I'm Greg Ehrbar. I am a author historian, as so many thousands on YouTube are. But I've written some books: Mousetrack, Story, Walt Disney Records. Co-edited co-wrote it with Tim Hollis. Co-edited the Inside the Whimsy Works story of Jimmy Johnson at Disney, one of the
Mhm.
first memoirs. Co-edited that with Idir Gez. And I've got a book. Look for it on Amazon or on the University Press of Mississippi website because it's going to be available for pre-order, called Hanna-Barbera: The Recorded History.
Cool.
And so I'm a busy little bee. And I also have a podcast called The Fantastic World of Hanna-Barbera that is currently running with cool guests, including Mark, who will be on a future show.
Yes. And that's where I mentioned Hong Kong Phooey, but that's not this.
Yes, yes, number one super guy. Uh-oh, I
Oh,
didn't silence my phone.
how dare you? It sounds like Jingle Bells. So
Oh, you know
jingle
what it
bells,
is?
jingle.
It's the opening to Alice in Wonderland, or What's a Nice Kid Like You.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Once you
You know,
said
if
that,
you
I go,
play the
yes.
beginning of the album, that's my ringtone. It sounds like a phone. You know, it's so cool. My daughter is so over it. Dad, would you please?
Well, you said on a different show. I want to do a minor diversion, and I need to know now. You said on a different show that you're a huge, huge fan of Alice in Wonderland. How did that come
Yeah.
about? And then we can talk about Rankin Bass.
It started when I was about 5, and they ran the Charlotte Henry Paramount version on local TV.
Oh yeah.
And I'd never seen anything. Well, I was 5. I'd never seen a lot of things, but it totally captivated me from that moment because the idea of going from one, it was science fiction fantasy. It was going from
Hmm.
one portal to the next. And in the Charlotte Henry one, they did it so cool because the rabbit hole was like in her backyard. So right away, I'm a kid. Um, and my son did this too when the Tim Burton one came out, hunting for the magic rabbit hole that's going to take you to Wonderland. So then the and I had not seen the Disney one because it was out of release. It was on TV, but we missed it, I think, in '64. But in '66, Hanna-Barbera did a wonderful musical version, and everything. I remember Wednesday night, December 30th, no, March 30th, 1966. I was telling the lunchroom ladies, I had to be real good. I could not wait. Loved it, loved it. The album came out. That introduced me to Hanna-Barbera Records. And then, of course, the Camerata Darlene Gillespie version of the Disney score is probably my favorite record of all time. I call it the greatest ever. Some people even agree.
Yeah.
And then when I saw this in '74, when Disney's version was released to theaters, I sat through it 6 times.
Oh wow.
Absolutely fell in love.
Yeah.
I'm always going to be grateful to Randy Thornton at Walt Disney Records for releasing the soundtrack in the '90s.
Uh-huh.
And it's my favorite theme park ride too. Disneyland. I remember dreaming of going on it, and having these, what's it going to be like?
Mm.
And didn't go on it till the '80s. I looked at
Yeah.
it in the Viewmaster,
Well, to
just
tell you
love
the
it.
truth, you probably couldn't write it very well until the 80s. I mean, I remember going to Disneyland throughout the 70s, and invariably the Alice in Wonderland ride was broken down for whatever reason. I think they
Really?
fixed it when they updated Fantasyland in 83 or whatever year that was, and it's like it's never had those problems, but it used to have like tracking problems or something where the thing
What
would
was it like
derail or
though
something.
when
Well,
it
it went
worked?
outside a lot, that was the weird thing about the ride. It was kind of like a half, you know, it's my show. I can say half-assed ride in comparison. I mean, granted, the original Fantasyland rides, I don't know how early you went to Disneyland.
'87, they were
Oh,
changed
okay.
already.
So pre 83, before they upgraded it to New Fantasyland, which is now hideously old Fantasyland, but it's not the original Fantasyland. The original Fantasyland rides were done very much on the cheap, and lots of I'm sure it's plywood, but it seemed to be cardboard cutouts of things, and not much movement, and like things like, and then the Snow White ride was something where Snow White wasn't in it because you or me was
It took
supposed to
me a
be
while to
Snow
figure
White,
that
but
out.
nobody ever got it. So they just threw up their hands and put Snow White in it. Nobody ever got what you're supposed to be. Um, and the one that's remained mostly unchanged from the old version is probably Peter Pan. That's still
Yeah.
the same. The Mr. Toad's very similar, but they upgraded so it wasn't so plywood, you know, on the
Well,
cheap,
Peter Pan has the what is it? Not laser, the fiber optic
Yeah,
style outer space scene in it and
yeah.
stuff.
And
So
I don't know if it's fiber optic originally, but it always had that effect, if it was
mhm.
done with light bulbs or however they used to do everything,
It's Christmas tree
which,
lights.
yeah. But going back to the Alice ride, and then we'll somehow turn this into Rankin Bass.
Well,
But
we'll be right back, folks.
the original Alice in Wonderland ride, I know it didn't open with the park. It opened like in '58 or something like that,
Yeah, up and
and
around. Yeah,
it was just like, oh, let's just slap this on the side of the castle, and we don't have that much money to do this because Disney really didn't make a profit much until Mary Poppins. So anything he did went back into the park as much as he could, and he had sponsors
mm.
and everything, all this. So, but and but the ride originally would go out in the open, which is kind of weird because it's a dark ride, and then you're suddenly out in bright sunlight and like, whoa, and then
Mhm.
you'd zip around and then you'd go back in, and it did that a couple times from my memory, and then later they changed it where I don't think you go outside. Maybe you go outside once, but
You go
I don't.
outside now a little bit
Yeah,
towards
but
the
it
end.
was
Yeah,
a lot then. you know
no
and
kidding.
like I said, it always seemed to be broken. I don't know if it was really broken or if it was like the ice cream machine at McDonald's where we just don't want to deal with it today. Let's you know I mean, the other obvious Alice ride was the teacups, which have been there
Hmm.
since the day it opened. So it's like, and so I guess they figured, well, we already got an Alice ride, this is good. So
Oh,
and the Mad Hatter hat shop, and things like that. So
you know what's funny about though? You mentioned that you are Snow White and no one really got it, including myself.
mhm.
You don't have that effect with Alice because I have this theory that we all identify with Alice
Yeah,
because she's navigate and I call Alice a documentary sometimes rather than a because as I get older it just reflects the world. She's
yeah,
wandering through this complete topsy-turvy nonsense thing and trying to make sense of it and having these heated discussions with the characters and everything is this illogic is logical to her and I don't think we think twice when we go through Wonderland that we're doing it too, you know?
yeah, yeah. And that might be the reason why, it's like, I want to go through Wonderland. I don't really want to go on a scary adventure with a huntsman chasing after me and going into this house with
Yeah.
little dwarves. And, I don't know. I really don't want to go there, But Peter Pan, hey, yeah, let's fly in a boat
Peter
or a
Pan,
ship or whatever,
they can build billion-dollar attractions now, and they're all quite lovely and shiny. But the line at Peter Pan and the
Yeah,
magic of Peter Pan, it's so simple.
yeah.
It's just, I don't know. Ray Bradbury loved it.
Well, there's always Walt's favorite dark ride too. And I don't think that would have changed with Space Mountain or anything that came out after his death. I think he probably would
Was it
still
his
say
favorite as well? Oh,
it
I didn't know
was.
that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Anyway, so I don't know how to switch it back. So Rankin Bass is what we're really supposed to be talking about.
Rankin
But
Bass. Well, it does
did they
relate to
do an
Disney.
Alice in Wonderland over at Rankin Bass? And
Oh,
it seems like someone.
they were very attached to Pinocchio, Alice in Wonderland, and Wizard of Oz. You
Okay,
saw that going on constantly in their work from
okay.
almost the beginning.
So how would to tie it in? How does Alice in Wonderland kind of figure into it? Not directly, it's kind of
Oh,
indirectly, correct?
well, they did do that girl in Wonderland,
That's true. I forgot about that. Yeah,
and
okay.
then
I
Festival of
was going
Family
through in my head,
Classics.
like mentally thinking, okay, this, that, that, no, no, Brady kids, no, Osmonds, no. Well, maybe an Osmonds episode, I don't know. But
But they did the idea of a journey through a magic land happened. It was mostly Wizard of Oz and Pinocchio, but they did do a version of Alice in Wonderland for that syndicated Festival of Family Classics
That's
series
true.
in
And I
'72.
figured they probably did something there too. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You know, but it was those two because from the very beginning, when it was Videocraft, there were the two syndicated 5-minute cartoons, The New
Hmm.
Adventures of Pinocchio and the what is it? The New Adventures of the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
Um, you
And that
know,
was a cell
and
animated.
everybody who watched them knows the songs. And
So,
so that was, and each of those used the two techniques that we got to know because just ultimately it would be either cell animation or stop motion.
mhm.
That's kind of where it all. Well, actually, I mean, if we want to tell the beautiful story of Rankin Bass,
Sure,
we
go
can
ahead.
do that.
And then how tie it
Arthur
into how
Rank.
you first heard about them too. So,
Well, many of us it was Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer
okay. I didn't know
because
if that was your first exposure
that
or
was
not.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? I remember watching Return to Oz. I'm not that old and creaky, but I was a little kid, but I remember watching it
Hmm.
because when about 2 years later, my aunt bought me the Happy Time Wizard of Oz album,
Hmm.
and I thought it was similar to that. It had no connection at all. But
Hmm.
I said, "Oh, that Oz thing we saw on TV, that's like this." I was a kid, but I
Yeah.
did. We watched it, and
Yeah.
so that was the first thing, and that was when it was Videocraft as well. As a matter of fact, I think the name Rankin Bass was added to Rudolph later because
Yeah.
I don't think it said that. They weren't called that,
No.
so I think that came later.
Well, also they revised the ending in the second year, which
Yeah.
it's kind of funny. The revised ending is what I saw for a number of years, and then the original one got slapped on. And I think now with home video, I think on these DVDs and Blu-rays, uh, the original ending is more prominent now. I think maybe I'm wrong about that. What is that? I guess Rudolph was the first exposure you had to Rankin Bass, to your knowledge.
Actually, I saw the Return to Oz special. That was their very first special, and it was also GE Fantasy Hour in 1963. And so I remember getting the Happy Time Wizard of Oz album, thinking it was related to that, and it wasn't. But I was a kid, so I thought it was because it had a similar kind of uh, sound. But so that was the first, and
Hmm.
then Rudolph was kind of overshadowed all of that because that immediately caught on, and as many have said, it changed over the years because it had bits and pieces changed. The song, one of the songs changed out because I didn't have the record album until the late 70s. I
Hmm.
didn't know there was one because, back in the day, you didn't have your fancy Amazons. And if you special ordered at a store, it took weeks or months. And if you got a defective one, it was weeks or months to get another one. And the Rudolph album didn't have the song Fame and Fortune on it,
Yeah.
but it had an extended version. It still has an extended version of We're a Couple of Misfits, which
Hmm.
is the way the show was when it premiered. But then it was what they call a television spectacular. And in those days, in the early days of radio and TV, they used to do the specials over and over again live.
Hmm.
So the idea must have been with the sponsor, let's keep it fresh and keep changing it a little bit.
Hmm.
And so when I watched it in the 70s, which is when I got the album, I got used to Fame and Fortune
Right.
and kind of forgotten that it wasn't in the original
Right.
special.
And that's the way I saw it because um, I'm trying to think what my first exposure to Rankin Bass possibly, probably Rudolph, but it may have been something as inane as the Jackson 5 show, on Saturday mornings.
Well, that was
And
a
then,
huge hit.
yeah,
That was
because, I don't know what they have the season before. I have to think about each. It's like they had the tomfoolery show. I think I
I
saw that.
love that.
Yeah. So it was some Saturday morning thing. I think I saw first because Rudolph would have been in December. But it's quite possible I could have seen it the year before. But I don't know. It's like I'm thinking I saw some Saturday morning thing first, and then I saw Rudolph, and then I saw the other ones. I know for a fact, and we'll get into this later, but the one you did the commentary on, Santa Claus is Coming to Town, I saw first run. I know I did on that one, but
And
Anyway,
remember the cat, you probably remember the ad in TV Guide that said Santa Claus is coming to town with the date.
yes,
And
yeah,
I think it was Parker Brothers. I remember those ads because you'd get the TV Guide.
hmm
And two things about TV Guide: it had the teletypes and the yellow page in the front and in the back.
hmm
And it would announce what was in production. So and
hmm
you knew it was going to be Rankin Bass, even if they didn't say, because it had stars in it, what they
yeah.
were working on. And then when the specials were on, you would go through and plan your whole life around them. I remember when I started working in my teen and college years, I was hoping I wouldn't have the day off. But when I was working at one store, I would go over to the Woolco, to the TV department, to watch the specials because I was working those evenings on my break. You know,
hmm
so it was kind of bittersweet because it wasn't quite the same. But
Right. You mentioned the celebrity hosts. I'm thinking, and especially now, since they've been on for 60 years, a lot of them. Um, I think most people's first exposure to Burl Ives, Jimmy
right,
Durante, Fred Astaire, you name it, is probably from these specials, and they probably find out later. Oh my God, he was a dancer in the 30s. Oh my God, he was a comedian with a big nose. Oh my God, he was,
yeah,
he was a folk singer. It's like, now Burl Ives was quite active still in the early
yes,
70s. So I mean, I saw America Sings, and I was like happy over at Disneyland. So I was happy that, oh wow, got Burl Ives for that, and I think he did TV specials and stuff, so he's around.
yeah,
And of
he
course,
did,
you find out later that he was a proper actor. He did Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and things like that. So, but it's like for someone just discovering Rudolph now, it's kind of odd. It's who's this kind of plump snowman guy with a little goatee? Who is that? If you're
yeah.
just discovering it as a little child. But hopefully they will use it to research and find out, oh, he had an extensive and varied career.
I
So.
think a lot of young people are perhaps more interested in finding out more than maybe they're given credit for, because
Yeah.
it is easy to access this information, and you can find out that Burl Ives won, I think it was two Oscars or two, for the other was the Big Country. He
Oh yeah.
was he was incredible in that, and he did a ton of Disney movies, and
hmm
including "So Dear to My Heart," which introduced the Lavender Blue Dilly Dilly
Yeah.
song, and Summer Magic. So Rankin Bass was able to get big names of legendary status. So those names still endure because they were involved in things. They were famous for such a long time and so many things,
Right.
that even though the names may not be familiar because they don't make anything now because they're no longer with us, they left such a backlog of
Right.
major entertainment that it doesn't hurt at all. It doesn't hurt at all that you've got Jimmy Durante, Fred Astaire. And then in their features, they had big names. Haley Mills was in The Daydreamer, and
Oh yeah.
Sesu Hayakawa, and Boris Karloff and Mad Monster Party. So
Right.
from what Maury Laws told me, these big stars trusted Rankin Bass. They did their homework. They knew what they were doing. These people were not always used to doing animation voices, but they were so professional. They had such a great reputation because it was
hmm
unusual for stars to do cartoons. It was
hmm
fairly rare. It wasn't a requirement for features and specials now, as it is.
Now, do you know? I mean, later on, I'm sure it was easy. You call up Buddy Hackett. Hey, you want to do one? Oh, okay. But early on, do you know if it was difficult getting, say, Burl Ives or any of these earlier, say, Jimmy Cagney for the story of Smokey the
Yes.
Bear? He was retired. So, um,
It took the president to do
oh,
that.
okay. I mean, we can go off onto that tangent. What happened there?
Well, he did the special, The Ballad of Smokey the
Ballad of
Bear
Smokey the
in 1966, I believe.
Yeah,
And he did not want to come out of retirement. Shirley Booth also had pretty much retired in 74 when she did The
sure.
Year Without a Santa Claus. But,
hmm
what a great voice.
Yes,
for stuff. They knew they were not only famous, but they had great voices
that's
for
true.
things.
Yeah.
And a lot of them had worked in radio.
Hmm.
So Jimmy Cagney's situation was that he said no, and
Hmm.
then he would said, "Well, I'll do it if." Um, I think well, Rankin had connections because he worked
Oh,
for
okay.
ABC. He was very much he was very much a raconteur, and he managed to get Lyndon Johnson to send him a letter, because this was for the Forestry Service. This was a Smokey the Bear still is iconic when it comes to fire prevention. We check our Smokey Bear sign up the street. We've had wildfires that we almost lost our house. So we depend on Smokey the Bear.
Yeah.
So it was an important thing to do. It was
Right.
a pretty serious special. It wasn't as comical as some.
Hmm.
And it's too bad it isn't shown more. I think you can find it on YouTube,
Yeah.
but it is shown a lot, perhaps because of contractual things. And
I
it's
always
not
think
seen.
I always think it's because it doesn't have real holiday theming,
Yeah,
like
their
the other ones.
non-holiday stuff isn't as well known because they're real. And Rankin Bass really became, and I remember TV Guide calling them the leading producer of holiday specials because that's kind of what they became. But they
Hmm.
weren't that in the 60s and 70s. They were
Right.
and they stayed a small company in downtown New York with a
Hmm.
suite of offices, production coordinators, and almost all the creative work was freelance. So they may
Hmm.
have used people a lot, but they were not necessarily on staff there. They didn't have an animation studio per se, but because of Rankin Bass, the rise of the great studios in Japan, particularly Studio Ghibli,
Hmm.
which in essence came out of the Topcraft studio and
Right.
had an involved has it Hayao Miyazaki was a young animator on a lot of these things.
Mhm.
They had a lot to do with what anime became because there wasn't that kind of animation much on television
Hmm.
except for Astro Boy and Kimba the White Lion and my favorite Prince Planet that American International made.
Right.
So you know what else I knew Rankin Bass from Saturday Morning was the King Kong show.
Oh yeah, that's right. No, that I
Maybe
didn't see
theme
first run,
song.
but I did see it. Like they resold it in weekday strips, and so it was
It was
just
very,
syndicated
very
in the
popular.
afternoons. So yeah, and it had
And
Thomas
that was really Saturday mornings.
THUMB.
Oh,
Anyway.
yeah, yeah. 10 times as big as all my. Whoa, whoa. Maury Laws loved using the French horns,
Hmm. Hmm.
for exciting moments and stuff. It was so you knew that
Yeah,
they made it because of the sound as well as because of the picture. It was an
yeah.
unusual look and network TV had never had a Japanese animated series made for American television
Hmm.
because Astro Boy was dubbed,
Right.
and as with I think with the intent of marketing it here, so the way Speed Racer was, Speed Racer
Hmm.
was intended to be so, but it was a dubbed cartoon, whereas Rankin Bass did all of the preliminary work here with people like Don Duga who did the boards and then the keyframes and the people like Jack Davis and Paul Coker doing the designs. And so what they would do was they would have the art ready to go and the sound completely ready, or almost
Hmm.
maybe they would have some roughs, but it was all worked out far in advance. A lot of that was Jules Bass too, because Jules Bass timed it to the second, had that's one of the reasons those specials never seem to have much fat to trim. They always seem to have everything running, the motor running all the way through. They didn't lag very much or feel padded. That was, according to Maury, that was Jules Bass. And so the boards, the script, the recording, the music, perhaps the post scoring was done later. I doubt it. Because their productions audio wise were so tight that you could listen to them as records because there was a narrator and many of them were made into records. So I
Yeah.
think all that
Hmm.
got shipped, the keyframes, the maybe some preliminary animation, and Don Duga, who was the one of the continuity people, would do the boards. the sketches, Paul Coker Jr., Jack Davis, people like that would all get sent. And excuse me, and that was the way they did it from, I think they started in the late 50s, around the same time as Hanna-Barbera with commercials. But what they were doing, and Arthur Rankin did it because he was an art director at ABC. Jules
Hmm.
Bass was an agency copywriter. And so they knew a lot of influential people in New York already. Rankin was part of a program to look into ABC doing, or just the media doing materials in Asia. So
Hmm.
that's where he located these studios, and then he would supervise it. In the Danny Kaye book, it's, I don't know, it's Prince of Fools or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head. He and Danny Kaye went to Japan
Hmm.
to supervise and approve the figure that was made of him,
Oh yeah.
the way the animation was being done. They did do research to try to make them move the best they could. But Rankin Bass stop motion is done on twos and threes. It has a sort of wonderful herky jerky style to it, and that's the style that was done in Elf. There, it was deliberately done to
Oh
be
yeah.
to because there was discussion of, well, this isn't as fluid. We can do this on ones and we can have it look like Nightmare Before Christmas or something. He says, no, I want the Rankin Bass
Yeah.
style.
The herky jerky is great.
Yeah, yeah, it was very
Yeah.
distinctive. It almost felt like elaborate Macy's windows, you know,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
things moving in them. So that was, or at Disneyland, you had some of those windows. Everybody loves the windows.
Oh
So
yeah.
that was kind of the feel of them, and maybe that's why they've endured too, because technically it doesn't matter
Hmm.
what the limits are. The charm and the handcrafted feel of them are so completely wonderful. So by the 80s, when outsourcing became a necessity for the companies, Hanna-Barbera had taken over API Studios in Australia
Hmm.
and started also doing some animation overseas. And Hanna would go there and then he'd appoint a person to run it. Well, Disney did the same thing. They did the same thing that Arthur Rankin did in 1984. They located TMS, which really did
Hmm.
superb work. I am convinced the networks, it was worth the extra money to get really. That's one of the reasons their cartoons looked so incredibly good for television, because the name Disney
Hmm.
had to mean that kind of animation. So they could get results, partially because the name Disney probably got them more budget, but also because they found these really great studios. Soon everyone was using them,
Right.
and there were other ones, Phil Cartoons and places like that were being utilized. But it was the same thing. It was what Rankin Bass had done already. They were innovative.
Now, did they go to Asia all the way back on the Pinocchio show and
Yeah,
everything, or was that? Oh, okay. So they went
yeah. That was,
from the beginning. Okay.
I think it was Mushi or Toei, one of
Okay.
those companies. It says so at the end. It
Yeah.
has usually one or two Asian names in there, and some of those are highly renowned artists
Hmm.
that worked on them
Okay.
and are getting more, if you go online, getting much more recognition than they ever did, because people didn't understand, where
Hmm.
things were done or how they were done. And
Yeah.
so there is, yeah. And again, like I said, King Kong was sort of introduced it to Saturday morning TV, and it gave Rankin Bass, this small company in New York, the ability to be
Hmm.
prolific and a strong competitor with Filmation and Hanna-Barbera and the Patty Freeling on Saturday morning. Because if you look at the late 60s lineups of shows, and you can look at the lineups on Wikipedia of what was on,
Right. Hmm.
they were contenders with these
Oh yeah.
powerhouse companies on the
Yeah.
West Coast.
Yeah, well, I always say during the early '70s, especially, there was four big companies, and you mentioned three of them is Hanna-Barbera, Filmation, Patty Freeling, Rankin Bass,
Mhm.
and you got a few others in there. The company, I always forget the name of it, that did Emergency Plus Four, and they
Yeah,
did
yeah.
Muhammad
Like
Ali,
Drake Chenault and
yeah,
let's see, the company that made Roger Ramjet, Ken
yeah,
Snyder Productions did Hot
yeah,
Wheels.
And then,
there
of
were
course, Total
some that,
Television did a few things, but they were done by the 70s. But they kept airing Underdog and Tennessee Tuxedo ad infinitum. So it's like it seemed like they were current,
and we should,
And
yeah, and we
of
should
course,
mention
Jay
your
Ward,
books because I
Well,
learned a lot from your books about
well, thank you.
TTV. And yeah, those they really had stopped after the Beagles,
Yeah,
but yeah, they were on all the time.
yeah,
And again, no matter what quote research says, kids don't care when anything was made. They just
no,
like it
no,
if it's fun.
yeah.
So
And the way they kind of haphazardly aired things on network and syndication, they may not air a certain episode for years, and so when you'd see it, you go, "Oh, a new one," and you
that's
wouldn't
right.
know. The only thing that kind of clued me in that these underdogs are all repeats is Wally Cox's death in 1973, and I go, "Oh, okay, I guess he's not going to do any more underdogs," not knowing he stopped doing them a decade before almost,
Yeah.
So
We had nowhere to look up when they were made, how many episodes were made. So when one repeated, we had no idea, were there 17 of them? Were
yeah.
there, 39? We didn't know any of that. So
Yeah, I
the
didn't know
question,
anything until I did that book as how many there were. And there's not like a set number. Like, it would be nice if they were all 13 or 17 or whatever, like Hanna-Barbera typically was at the time, but the way it was told to me, and it was when General Mills thought that they had enough episodes, they said, "All right, that's enough." And it
yeah.
could be 70 episodes, it could be 140 episodes, whatever. They just said, "Nope, that's enough of that one. Do a new show." You
Yeah, yeah, which isn't too different from how it evolved with cable TV.
Yeah.
If one of those teen sitcoms had enough episodes, they'd stop making it because they could just rerun them and rerun them. And now that's what the streaming services do too. They'll go some if the show's a huge hit, just like network TV, they'll keep it going. But
Hmm.
a lot of times they'll just let it go with a few episodes. So except that you can pick the ones you like. We would get all excited if, like, oh, it's the Tennessee Tuxedo where he made a record, abracadabra, change orangery.
Right.
We didn't have the control of what they were showing us. The other thing that was weird is because General Mills owned both the Rocky and the Ward and the TTV stuff, and also tied in with Hanna-Barbera Space Cadets and Young
Oh, yeah.
Samson. They would mix those cartoons even on network TV.
Right.
So the styles were, even though the animation might be the same, the styles of them are vastly different.
Right. And to this day, I don't even know the story completely because it was kind of a very, convoluted way of doing TV. I just know that it eventually became the program exchange, which was in
Mhm.
syndication for a long, long time. And that's how you saw those shows for a number of
Well,
years. So,
I think they called it a barter system that they
yeah,
did with
that's totally what
syndicated
it was.
shows where the sponsor would guarantee so many and payment for so many commercials. And that's why General Mills being so big, they were
Hmm.
able to make it very comfortable for a station to run the cartoons because they would support so much of the advertising revenue. And that's one of the reasons that that Rocky and Bullwinkle and all those endured for such a long time and played for so long, and other
Hmm.
cartoons didn't. And conversely, according to your book, the Beagles didn't have a deal like that. They
Yeah.
did that alone, so it kind of
Mhm.
faded away.
Now, did Rankin Bass have any sort of deals like that, to your knowledge?
I doubt it.
Okay.
They pretty much went wherever this a network, a sponsor, or a production company would take them.
Okay.
That's why it's hard to do a complete anything. That's why that collection is pretty significant because the with the blue cover, and which I think it's Blu-ray now, and it's Blu-ray
Yeah.
as well as
Yeah, I
DVD.
got it on DVD and they didn't put it out on Blu-ray initially. Now it's on Blu-ray, but I don't know if I'm going to rebuy it because I do have the set that came out the year before that has like six of these on Blu-ray, and I
Yes.
go, that's enough Blu-ray for me.
Well,
Five or
Jerry
six,
Beck was
so
very thrilled when that set
yeah,
came out because what it meant was that for business reasons, it meant that studios could play nice
yeah,
because that took Warner and Universal to combine their library to get all of the major specials on there. Because
right,
before you had to buy several sets and sets within sets, and
yeah.
they all had the title Classic Christmas Special, so it was hard to find.
And they would duplicate things sometimes. Like
you
I think
know,
I had I don't know which one I'm looking on here. I probably had the Year Without a Santa Claus like on three different sets, just so I could get. Oh, this set has the Pinocchio one.
Right.
Oh, this has the Leprechauns. Okay, this one has
Yeah.
the life and story of Santa Claus or whatever that one was called later on in the '80s. And it's like,
Mhm.
and some of them were through Warner Archives, and you had to go through
It's
some
true.
really roundabout way. And so I had like a DVD shelf like this thick, and now it's all this.
Yeah. Yeah, me
um
too. But that's the
uh
same thing with their series.
yeah,
What series they did do, some of King Kong was released, and some of, well, Tomfoolery wasn't, because I mean, I'm surprised you brought it up. It was my brother, my older brother, and his friends who are older than me. That show would have, NBC didn't know what they had. That show was
yeah,
nuts, and
yeah,
all the older kids loved that, and
yeah.
because it was nuts,
I
and
don't know if I loved it, but I just remember like somebody with an umbrella head and just weird
yeah.
imagery like that. And so, I'd watch it. I watched everything, of course, but it's like it just stuck out. I didn't know it was called Tomfoolery until years later, when I was researching for Rankin Bass just to see what shows they did. But it's like, once I saw that, I go, "Oh my God, that's that show that has a fish in a fishbowl and all this weird stuff going on."
Yeah, and
But
the
then,
characters had weird names. Yongi Bongi Bo is the one I can remember best, but I think the elephant was the umbrugulus. I don't know. They had, it was based on Lewis Carroll and not Norman Lear, Edward Lear
Edward Lear, yeah.
rhymes, and it had a
Yeah,
lot of songs and the wonderful Mike Sam singers for the
yeah,
late 60s, early 70s. The Mike Sam singers at Abbey Road recorded a
mhm,
lot of the singing um, in Santa Claus is Coming to Town. The
mhm,
ones, a lot of the prime 70s, early 70s specials. They sang with the Beatles, they sang with Barbara, it was
yeah,
like Butter. So they were like the best in Europe.
yeah, hmm. So yeah, it seems like everybody was on the bandwagon doing like really crazy cockeyed shows. Patty Freeling had Here Comes the Grump,
Here
which was
comes the
kind of a
grump.
loose Oz type ripoff, and then uh, even Hanna-Barbera kind of dabbled in some strange concepts, around that time. I don't know if it was just the late '60s, and of course, Sid and Marty Krofft, they were
Yeah.
just nuts. So,
It was getting
um,
increasingly nuts in the 70s.
yeah,
The
yeah,
wilder the better, the
yeah.
premises. Uh,
So I don't know if that's what they liked or not. I mean, um,
some of it was just
Rankin
throwing
Bass,
some of it was just throwing stuff at the wall. The best example was Saturday Superstar movie, because
right?
all the animation companies, including Hal Seeger, were doing these
Yeah,
basically pilots. It's where Yogi's Gang came
right.
from. These hour thing that was very Michael Eisner, because it was like the ABC
Yeah,
movie of the week, which also was kind of, and Love American Style, which was a way of getting
yeah,
shows like Happy Days on.
yeah,
It was eclectic beyond belief.
yeah. I have to say that's probably, even though it's kind of piecemeal how they got together, but it was probably my favorite show, hands down, in the early '70s, on Saturday morning, because you didn't know who was going to turn up. It's
Mhm.
like one week would be Lost in Space, next week that girl, next week Gidget, next week Banana Splits. You didn't know,
Yeah.
and then talk about crazy concepts. You got your uh Daffy and
Oh, the
Porky with the
infamous
groovy ghoulies. How did that happen?
yeah, that one is legendary. That goes up there with the Star Wars holiday special. The Daffy and was it Porky and Daffy?
Yeah,
Wasn't
no,
Bugs. Bugs couldn't be
no.
involved in that, but
I
um,
mean, I think there was licensing reasons why they couldn't have Bugs, but probably if Bugs was a real living, breathing soul, he would be. I'm glad I dodged that bullet.
what was cool about and we're getting in the weeds, but we do that a lot on mine
Yes,
too, is because
yeah,
it all kind
yes,
of relates.
yes.
Was the live action moment
Mhm.
in that hour, and which apparently was a film that Lou Scheimer produced. Then those were the guys from the rock band who also did a tiny bit of touring, and they made this film like out at some dusty old set and just threw it together. And and they used it in the special. Saturday morning TV, they never wasted anything. That was one example of that.
Now,
But Rankin,
totally shifting gears because you'd mentioned it once or twice, and it's the question I had for a bit. And you are huge, huge, huge on music
mhm.
from these shows, and not just these shows, Disney and everybody else, and of course your book. And you mentioned earlier, but how did you approach all these shows when you were growing up? Were you listening for the music, or are you more interested in the animation? What attracted you to these Rankin Bass shows?
As I got to know the way they were produced, and there was a solid musical comedy drama format to them, I
Hmm.
would approach each one just like when there were at the time original Sherman Brothers film musicals coming out.
Hmm.
There was the ballad, there was the the I Want song, there was the song that was sung twice by different groups of people. There was the catchy tune, there was the novelty number, and what I didn't know at the time was what they were using was the classic Broadway format that went back to Oklahoma, and to a degree, and you could also say Snow White. And it started with things like Showboat and stuff, but it was
Hmm.
classic musical comedy, the Lehman Ingalls school of how to put them together, the sort of thing that came back to Disney with Little Mermaid and Howard Ashman. And there's
Hmm.
famously a lecture that he gave to animation about how to bring a contemporary flair to the classic Disney using Broadway, both traditionally and contemporary. And what he was doing and what Pixar was doing when they began was going back to what worked, but freshening it. And that's what
Yeah.
Rankin Bass did. They did that when Disney wasn't doing it. I mean, there were some
Hmm.
terrific Disney films in the 60s and 70s. Um, sorry. Um, but they were largely not, they had songs in them and set pieces, but they weren't musicals so much
Yeah.
as song after song with a specific thing. Jungle Book is highly musical, but those are
Hmm.
musical set pieces. In fact, when we
Right.
got the albums, those songs were long because a lot was going on during them, but there
Hmm.
wasn't the classic structure. Starting with 101 Dalmatians, probably because Sleeping Beauty underperformed, as they say,
Ooh.
or disappointed, but
Yes.
but picked up momentum years later as many Disney classics that are returned to and not discarded, um, because they originally weren't successful. We find that a lot too. There's an audience for these things, and if you bring them back, it's a big surprise. Wow.
Hmm.
Well, but at the time, they were looking at new techniques. They were having to cut budgets, and 101 Dalmatians used the Xerox process, but also stepped away really from being a musical. It had
Right.
about
Okay.
four
Like
songs, but they were real quick.
Canine Crunchies, and then
I
like
love
the
that. I
Cruella de Vil is the two
Yeah,
I can think of. I
but
don't
the
know if
but
there's more.
Cruella de Vil is
Eh,
is made incidental to the plot rather than
right,
everybody stops and sings Cruella de Vil. That's not
right.
the way it was done. Uh, but Rankin Bass from the start, from
Yeah,
Return to Oz, was doing that structure, and really nobody in animation was really doing it. And if they did, it was very rare. But Rankin Bass was just giving us these new individual musicals with, except for the familiar song, which they always very wisely, and this was probably Romeo Muller and Jules Bass, they very cleverly wove the lyrics of Rudolph with your nose, stop calling me names,
yeah.
they were walking, you won't be in reindeer games. They were working the lyrics and bits of the song.
Right.
Frosty the Snowman, it takes them 25 minutes to sing it. you know. So they were
Yeah.
doing that, but then they were also throwing either original songs like Johnny Marks's or the great Laws and Bass
Yeah.
combination, original scores. Who was doing that? Very
Yeah.
little. The Shermans were doing it,
Yeah.
and but it wasn't it wasn't being done in animation hardly at all. And sometimes they would even take a half hour and put an original score in it. The best example is, well, there's several. The Little Drummer Boy had one star in the night. and it had Why
Mm-hmm.
Can't the Animals Smile? I mean, in a half hour, you have these memorable songs in addition to
Mm-hmm.
Little Drummer Boy. And then 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. You've got the great Even a Miracle Needs a Hand and Give Your
Mm-hmm.
Heart a Try and, Christmas bells are ringing Santa, and then a musicalized version of the entire poem that
Yeah.
starts at the beginning and then finishes at the end. So musical form, musical theater form and musical film form was very much in their things. We
Right.
didn't know why we liked that, but we sure did. And Year Without
Mm-hmm.
Santa Claus, who doesn't know the Heat Miser and the Snow Miser song,
Right.
even from Batman?
Right.
So,
Now.
and not only that, but what Maury Laws would do also is create background themes. So even Frosty the Snowman, there may be one song, but there's also da 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 da
Mm-hmm.
da 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 da. So you're getting a wonderfully rich piece of music in addition.
Mm-hmm. Now, how much of an influence do you think Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol had on all these specials?
I think that it may have had quite a bit because that
Okay.
that was the first.
Right.
Now we have to even go back. Mr. Magoo was the first animated musical special for TV. But if you go
Mm-hmm.
back to the 50s, they were doing not only Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella, which was a mammoth hit, and so was Mary Martin and Peter Pan.
Mm-hmm.
Incidentally, done, year after year, like for 2, 3 years, they would do it again.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get those now on DVD. And you can also get Babes in Toyland on DVD that NBC did year after year with Wally Cox and I think Barbara Cook. But they would
Mm-hmm.
change out songs or change out,
Mm-hmm.
routines and stuff. So they're loads of fun to watch. And then there was a special, one of the ones Rankin Bass remade in the late 70s called The Stingiest Man in Town,
Right.
which was originally an Alcoa hour. I think you can find this online with Basil Rathbone and Vic Damone. And the score from that is so great.
Mm-hmm.
But it was done live. There's no video to speak of it. It's black and white. Rankin Bass remade it with Tom Bosley and Walter Matthau. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that for a long time,
Hmm.
but it's a terrific album. The album's also on CD. It's a terrific
Mm-hmm.
album. So the form of television musical was already there. And Max
Mm-hmm.
Liebman, who made your show of shows, did a lot of those. He did Heidi, a musical version of that, and there was a lot of the Our Town was a television musical, and that's where Love and Marriage came from, not from Married with Children.
No.
So television was used to that, was
Yeah.
used to the musical form. Mr. Magoo did it first in '62.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think Timex was the sponsor. I think probably, if not to, I mean, the ratings must have been huge because nothing else was like it. I mean, that's a Daryl Van Sitter's question. How were the
Right.
ratings? But I can't imagine they weren't astronomical because
Right.
nothing else was like it. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, we know, Rudolph was a huge success. Return to Oz, maybe not so much because they didn't know where to put these specials to. I remember Rudolph being on at like 5:30 or, Sunday or 6:30. The times were weird and back,
Well,
but
was Return to Oz kind of like a test run just to see if it
I
would
think
work
so.
for them? Yeah.
And that
Okay.
and that was they didn't always outsource to Japan because they also did stuff in Canada, and Return to Oz as well as Tales. It was Tales of the Wizard of Oz were done by a company called Crawley Films.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they didn't do the animation in Canada, often they would use Canadian voice actors. And the voices in Rudolph are all Canadian, largely due to someone named Bernard or Bunny Cowan, who also did voices and announcing. So and King Kong was also, so when you hear Billy Richards, who's the voice of Rudolph, also playing Bobby Bond in King Kong, oh, it's a Canadian cast. And Paul Soles, who was the voice of Spider-Man
Right.
for the '67 version, he was
Mm-hmm.
Hermie the Elf, and so he was also a Canadian actor
Mm-hmm.
that they used quite often. You can hear them all constantly through Festival of Family Classics because there's
Right.
quite a few episodes of that.
Yeah. And then, of course, they have Paul Frees, who was just like their
Yeah.
everyman that they had to put in every show.
All Freeze could have done. I love the scene in Santa Claus is Coming to Town where the Burgermeister is presented with the baby by Grinsley, and Paul Freeze is all three voices.
Yeah.
He could have done them all. He would have done them all.
Yeah.
But and that's so often the case. Yeah, and June Foray did so many, and uh, oh yeah, there were. But yeah, Paul Frees was a staple of the late '60s, early '70s Rankin
Mhm.
Bass sound.
How did Paul Frees manage to do that, if you don't mind diverting on to him for a second? Uh, like Mel Blanc's, for the most part, at least for the majority of his career, was Warner Brothers. I mean, later he did a lot of Hanna-Barbera voices, but it seemed like Paul Frees transcended any one studio. He worked for Disney, he worked for Rankin Bass, he worked for Walter Lantz, he worked for you name it, how did he transcend that and he wasn't so contractually obligated to one single studio?
I think that Mel Blanc's career was not parallel in the '50s when he was still contracted to Warner Brothers, while Paul Frees was gaining a lot of momentum. He was on screen a few times too, but he was gaining a lot of momentum as a Hollywood um, uh, ADR, dialogue replacement looping actor,
Oh yeah.
as well as a very ubiquitous narrator of things. So he was doing stuff beyond cartoon voices. So
True. Yeah.
he did a lot of trailers. Disney used him a lot in the late '50s and early '60s,
Hmm.
all the way up through the Haunted Mansion and things like that.
Hmm.
So his career, the assignments he got were different. The kind of things that were expected of him were different. You can hear Mel Blanc doing some looping in
Yeah.
movies and TV shows sometimes, and June
Right.
Foray, but
Hmm.
Paul Frees forgot. He was in List of Adrian Messenger, which was
Yeah.
a highly prestigious thing. He was doing a lot of Kirk Douglas's voiceovers. It wasn't Kirk Douglas. People are going, "Ooh, he's so versatile." Yeah, with the help of Paul Frees. Nothing against Kirk Douglas, but
Yeah.
we all know when we hear the voice who it is.
Yeah.
Um, so overdubbing was being done for dialogue a lot, and there were certain actors and he just kept getting work because he could
Yeah.
do great impressions, and he was also on the Spike Jones show, famous
Hmm.
with Peter Lorre
Hmm.
talking to him, and sounding exactly like him.
Right.
So his ability to mimic, and that just put him in that position in this early '60s. Oh, we're going to run out of time soon.
Yeah.
Early
Um,
'60s as being, he had called himself, I think, on the back of one, maybe it was the Gay Paris album, the most heard actor in the world. It's very Mickey Rooney,
yeah.
something like that. I think he was pretty good at promoting that side, and his agent, I think he was with Charles Stern.
Hmm.
I do know from reading one of the books about Mel Blanc by his sound editor at his studio. Mel
Excuse me.
constantly felt like he wasn't being compensated properly, because Warner Brothers wasn't paying him a ton.
Right.
Alan Reed made more than he did on the Flintstones, and and doing cartoon voices didn't pay the way commercials did and
Yeah.
feature trailers. So Paul Frees was also doing very, very well
Yeah.
in that way.
And now that I'm thinking about it, I guess Paul Frees really didn't do cartoon characters until Rocky and Bullwinkle, or maybe he did some Walter Lantz prior to that.
Yeah, he did Walter Lantz. He did Disney.
Okay.
He did them here and there, but
But I mean,
he did so
majority
many
of them are
different things.
after Boris Badenov. It seemed like
Yeah.
like Ludwig von Drake started afterwards. I'm trying to
Hmm.
think of different ones he's known for.
He
Pillsbury
really
Doughboy, of
was
course, that's a
everywhere.
commercial. Fruit Loops and all that stuff. So it's like Toucan Sam. It's all later. So okay.
Well,
Yeah, I didn't I
Mark
didn't
Mark
really think
Edgar.
about it because when I was a kid, he's like it seemed like he voiced it. If it wasn't Paul Frees, it was Mel Blanc or it was Dawes Butler or June Foray.
Yeah,
Those were
yeah.
the ones that seemed to voice everything.
Mark Evanier also points out that Alan Melvin doesn't often get put in the same category because he's mostly known for his visual work.
Right.
But if you think about it, he also worked for pretty much every studio, including Rankin Bass.
Yeah.
He was on Kid Power and a couple of other things.
Yeah.
And he worked for everyone. He did voices in almost everything. And he was also on some of the greatest TV shows in history.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
people don't extol the talents of Alan Melvin as enough. He was versatile.
I think it's because, it's just like Howard Morris, it's
Yeah.
like they were mainly screen actors on TV or whatever in movies and stuff. But I mean, you saw them more often. It's like there's this interview I have with June Foray from decades ago, but she said her last on-screen appearance where she wasn't playing herself was a Mexican telephone operator on Green
Green
Acres.
Acres.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
after that, she said, I'd rather just do the voices. And she occasionally would appear as herself in a movie or something, but it would be as herself, not some other character. So, you know,
Yeah, she was
yeah,
on did sketches with Johnny Carson when he
yeah,
had
I
some
saw
kind of a
some of
sketch
those
comedy show.
recently. Actually, I got that little DVD set that has some of his old shows, and I go, June Foray's on here. John Stevenson was on there too, and it's
Yeah.
like, oh, so okay, I guess they all did kind of more acting back in the day. Same with Paul Frees, and then as they got older, it's like, hey, this voice acting work is a lot easier. I don't have to
Yeah.
dress up. I could do it from my house. I think that's how Paul Frees did a lot of stuff in his later years.
He was one of the first because
Yeah,
he was so prestigious and he lived far from Hollywood and he had like a 6-story house
yeah,
that they had to come to him,
yes, yeah,
because if they wanted him. And yeah, I believe that's what he did. Now because of COVID and all, I mean, there were actors that had home studios, but it wasn't the norm to
right.
have.
Because it was an interview I have on a tape. He interviewed with Jim Easton on KGO radio in San Francisco, and this is about a year or two before he died. Yeah, he says, "No, I love it here in Sausalito. That's where I live. You know, I'm not going anywhere. It's like the only time he flies to LA, which nowadays he wouldn't even have to do that, is to sign a contract. That's the only time he ever flew. Otherwise, he'd stay in the Bay Area because he loved it. So,
Arthur Rankin lived in Bermuda for the pretty much the rest of his life and was known as a Bermudan in the community. Listed in the paper as fellow Bermudan
hmm.
uh, Arthur Rankin. So that's what his residence was. But the way they had the operation, it was they could do things like they could be that way because he and they were like Rogers and Hammerstein or the Shermans. Rankin and Bass were very different personalities,
Hmm.
and uh, so it was they didn't necessarily step over each other, and Bass was more reserved and Rankin was the front man, the way Hanna was the production guy and Barbero was the salesman.
Hmm. But I guess they got along enough to work together for 20
Oh
plus
yeah,
years,
they in
so
fact Bass was there all the
that
way
was good.
through. I believe may have been Life and Adventures, may have been the last one, and a gentleman named Peter Bacalian who worked for Arthur Rankin for all the way up to Santa Baby. Said
Hmm.
that, and that's a special that doesn't get mentioned often, and that's really the
Right,
last special that had Rankin Bass on it. And
right.
there's a soundtrack album, and it's on DVD with Eartha Kitt and
Hmm.
Gregory Hines. That has and the Paul Coker look, so that's a pretty cool
Hmm.
special. Um, Peter said that they artistically had differences because Bass loved Life and Adventures of Santa Claus, and that was moving in more of a serious Hobbit-like tone because they were
Right,
starting to do these more epic adventure things like
right.
the Flight of Dragons, and excellent. Another one, Flight of
Yeah.
Dragons with John Ritter and
Hmm.
oh gosh,
We did the
Harry
last
Courtney.
unicorn. Oh,
Last
oh.
Unicorn is a man. Siskel and Ebert loved Last
Hmm.
Unicorn.
Hmm.
They even loved the way the script. They said the language of this film is so,
Hmm.
and they got all excited like little kids. They gave it rave reviews, and Jimmy Webb wrote this beautiful score for it.
Hmm.
They didn't have the ability like a lot of studios did, and Hanna-Barbera really didn't either. Even though Hanna-Barbera did get Paramount or Columbia behind them, unless they had the Disney name. The Disney name was above the title, and it didn't matter.
Hmm.
It didn't matter if there were celebrities; it was nice, but it was the Disney name. But if you weren't, uh, it was hard to get the notice and the publicity. They
Hmm.
weren't household. Hanna-Barbera wasn't a household name until the 70s.
Right.
Rankin Bass wasn't until probably years after, 80s and 90s,
Hmm.
because each generation embraced the specials. They never really go out of style, even the minor ones. The small, well, I
Hmm.
don't even kind of call them minor, but the short ones, like I love Leprechaun's Christmas Gold.
Hmm.
And the first White Christmas Story, the first Christmas Snow, with Angela
Yeah.
Lansbury doing that version of White Christmas that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Uh, Nestor,
There's
the long-eared Christmas donkey.
there's certain ones that when I saw them first run, I was like, really? And then years later, I'd see it again. Jack Frost comes to mind, and I go, that's not a bad special. What am I talking
Jack
about?
Frost is a almost more of a drama because
Yeah.
it's so sad because
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
unrequited love. It can't happen. That it's and it really bugged me that they weren't winning Emmys for these things, but
Yeah.
they were in New York, and
Hmm.
Dr. Seuss and Peanuts and the things that, let's face it, you don't necessarily vote for who you like, vote for your friends, but you certainly think your friends do fantastic work. And
Hmm.
so you're going, and the only special they were even nominated for, I think, was Little Drummer Boy Book Two.
Wow, I never
Yeah,
knew that. I
Hobbit
thought,
wasn't nominated, not even
wow.
nominated, to quote Steve Lawrence and Sammy Davis Jr. Not even nominated.
Now,
The
was it
Hobbit won the Chris.
because they weren't submitted, or it just was overlooked completely?
Well,
Okay.
it was a. I won't get into awards and the merit or lack of with awards, whether they're here to stay, but it is a community supported thing, and they were not part of. It's just like we talk about Paul Frees and June Foray and Mel Blanc and Dawes Butler. They were Hollywood voices. Hardly anyone talks about Lionel Wilson and Peter Fernandez and, oh, Bob McFadden.
Right.
The voice we grew up with and didn't know, but
Yep.
they were New York based, and the New York voice industry is more commercials,
Hmm.
stage actors, soap actors. They weren't as visible to us,
Hmm.
but they were nonetheless talented and versatile and kind of ubiquitous for a while as well. It's just two sides of the country. I think that has a lot to do with it. Just like Broadway and Hollywood are kind of separate and yet connected. The Hobbit did win the Peabody Award, which is pretty good, and it won the Christopher Medal, and it
Okay.
also was the first. Well, I think that Gene Deitch maybe was trying to get a feature done of it, and I think you can see some footage of it. But the Rankin Bass version was the first complete film version of a Tolkien thing, and the Tolkien family approved the script that Romeo Muller adapted for it.
Yeah.
So it was very prestigious. It was not huge budget because it was a TV movie. So there
Hmm.
are moments when you go, the battle scene, that's just some little dots moving around. I guess they figure my screen isn't very big, and that kind of thing. But then when you look at the design by Lester Abrams, and
Yeah.
the hardcover books came out of that.
Hmm.
And there also was, and I think you may find this online, there was a Macy's float of
Yeah.
Smaug, the dragon, and Orson Bean, because it was NBC, spoke, oh, look, it's Orson Bean. Where'd you come from? Well, I did. And he was on the Larry King show, and I called and asked about The Hobbit, and he said, I loved doing The Hobbit. He had
Hmm.
a great time, and talk about a cast. Otto Preminger and Paul
Right.
Frees and Don Messick and John
Yeah.
Stevenson.
Hmm.
And oh, golly, they really ramped up the cast for
Yeah.
those two that they couldn't do Lord of the Rings because Ralph
Right.
Bakshi had done it.
Yeah.
And Ralph Bakshi didn't have nice things to say about the Rankin Bass version, but at least it wasn't live action traced. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've watched it before. I've watched The Hobbit, then Bakshi's Lord of the Rings, and then Rankin Bass's Return of the King. So,
Yeah, those
back
are
to
all
back,
three.
I mean, it's different animation styles and techniques completely, and
It's
but
they're all valid. They're all
before the
valid.
live action Peter Jackson trilogy, that's kind of what you had. It's like
Yeah,
you wanted to see a good visualization of the entire epic, I suppose.
yeah, yeah. And by that time, Disneyland Records was releasing Rankin Bass soundtracks, and they did a box set with the whole soundtrack of The
Yeah.
Hobbit, and that got a Grammy nomination,
Mm.
which
I
was
do
kind of
remember also they had like one of those little record readers of the
they
Hobbit
did.
too,
There were
So
5 or 6 versions they did. They did the
mm,
read along book, the read along cassette. They did a
mm,
condensed soundtrack storyteller. Then they did the box set. And then, and this is cool, the green cover one that says songs by Glenn Yarborough, which is just the songs.
mm,
And that one isn't as easy to find, but I don't know that it's necessarily rare.
yeah.
But you get the songs in stereo, which is very nice.
Hmm. Now,
And
what I want to continue on is more about the music. I want to let's go back to Rudolph. I think if I'm wrong, it might be because they did a children's soundtrack for like Pinocchio or something. Is Rudolph the first soundtrack album to any Rankin Bass on that Decca album, or
yeah,
was there something for the Pinocchio show?
well, technically, it was the first major soundtrack. The New
Okay,
Adventures of Pinocchio was on FTP Records, which
okay.
is this is kind of fun to look into as far as Christmas and collecting too. That was the music service firm of Forel, Thomas, and Pollock, and that was those three people are where Maury Laws was working as an arranger and
Oh,
orchestrator.
okay,
And
okay.
and so FTP was a record label that they created because there were albums of songs by, I think it's the oh gosh, it's the one of them had a singing vocal group and did a couple of albums. They're on YouTube. They're pretty rare.
Hmm.
And Edward Thomas, I think, is his name. But so FTP put out the soundtrack of Pinocchio. It's pretty expensive to get
Yeah.
secondhand, but it is on YouTube to listen to, and it's a story and song record of it of because those were serialized, putting the adventures together. But
Mm-hmm.
Return to Oz, nothing but a test record with, the
Mm-hmm.
demos. They used to put the demos on vinyl with different singers and a small band or a piano. There was a demo record made of Return to Oz, but
Mm-hmm.
no soundtrack. There was, so Rudolph was the first, and it's only one-sided because the songs are not long, and so Decca was not going to put out a record that's about 8 minutes, or no, maybe I'd say it's about 15, 16 minutes long on side one. So what they
Yeah.
did was have a European orchestra do sort of easy listening versions of not only
Right.
all the songs from the musical, but also a few of Johnny Marks's other Christmas songs.
Right.
Herbert I don't know how to say it, Ribine or Ribine, who worked for
Uh-huh.
Bert Camford. So it has kind of a Bert Camford sound to it.
Okay.
So that was the
Interesting.
first, yes. The ones that did make it on Drummer Boy and Mouse on the Mayflower, also promotional sound through the gas company. I don't know that they
Now, why
still,
was that? What that seemed to be that Rankin Bass would do a lot of promotional albums
yes,
over
they
the years
did.
that weren't like commercially available. Had I seen those as a kid, I would have said, "Gimme, gimme, gimme!"
Yeah.
It's like, didn't they think there was an audience there for this?
I think they did, and I think they wanted to convince record companies of that. So they packaged them themselves. It was also a great sales tool. It was a great thing to hand out. Hanna-Barbera's Alice was done as a studio album with members of the cast, and the songs were a little different. But the soundtrack songs were issued on a vinyl record that E.H. Morris, the music publisher, put out. It's super duper rare, but that is on YouTube with the soundtrack. There's the six, well, the 5 songs plus the groovy bossa nova opening that I love, with the credits. Um, so they did the same thing, but Rankin Bass did it with pretty almost. If it wasn't commercially available, they usually did a promo. They did another one that was a Christmas promo that had several selections on it, some of them in stereo, but they didn't. They didn't release. Well, though, let me see which ones they did do, and I think it was to convince record companies it was a viable thing, because I'm sure the Rudolph one sold fairly well, and Charlie Brown Christmas was done as a music album in '65, and that's never gone out of print. They keep coming up with
Right.
new versions for me to buy, or to convince my wife, please. I know I have it, but I don't have every single take. I don't have
Right.
alternates.
So you had that big multi-$100 version that came out.
Well, there
Oh,
it's in the '70s, and
okay.
I'm still hoping this Christmas, couldn't do it last, hoping this Christmas it'll happen. But yeah, they
Okay.
take, what bugs me about the Charlie Brown Christmas album is I think the sides are wrong. I think the sides are flipped, and I always play it side two first and side one second, because
Hmm.
the Christmas Time Is Here by the children's chorus should come first, and then
Right.
the wonderful jazz, that sort of fades slowly away, should come at the end. That's the finale. You shouldn't
Yeah.
start with O Tannenbaum, because that's the middle of the special. I think from day one that was flipped wrong, and it's never been
It
changed.
probably was, now that I'm thinking about it, and they never said, nobody will notice
Well,
except
it's
Greg,
not
except Greg.
impossible. It's not impossible, and I'll tell you
Yeah.
why. Because when the Ray Conniff Christmas with Conniff album was released on CD, Sony got it wrong and
Oh.
started it with Jingle Bells instead of Here Comes Santa Claus. And
Mhm.
I spoke when Real Gone Music reissued all the Conniff stuff on one set.
Mhm.
I knew the producer and said, "Do you know that Christmas with Conniff is backward? Is flipped wrong, because the first song should be Here Comes Santa." He said, "No, I didn't know that. So thank you, America,
Mhm.
because on that set it's correct." But
Hmm.
sometimes mistakes can be made.
Yeah.
It's not a crime. It's just that, as a musical presentation, the Charlie
Yeah.
Brown should be played, side two first.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay, I'll have to keep that in mind because, well, of course, I have it on CD, so at the Star Trek 7 or
CD's
something.
wrong. CD's
Yeah.
wrong. And
Uh,
when the new one came out, and they were advertising it on Facebook, I said, "Please flip the sides. Please listen to
yeah.
it. It makes perfect sense." I
Yeah.
don't think they did. I think they'd already produced it. Maybe
Yeah.
someday,
Yeah.
thank you, America, but I don't, I'm not
Yeah.
gonna hold my breath. Anyway, Rankin Bass, MGM did the complete, and these were the first two that were complete. Oh, actually, if we want to go off of Christmas, King Kong was released as a story
Oh, okay.
soundtrack on Epic Records, along
Yeah.
with The Wacky World of Mother Goose.
Okay.
Wonderful score by George Wilkins and
Hmm.
Jules Bass. George Wilkins arranged a lot of the music for Epcot Center in Florida, or Epcot now. But
Hmm.
a lot of that stuff, George Wilkins works with Imagineering a lot, and the Daydreamer was issued on Columbia Masterworks. Mad Monster Party was not released
Hmm.
officially. It's never been released officially.
Oh,
RCA
even now.
posted
Okay.
it. No,
Oh,
what's
okay.
out is not official. Uh,
Okay.
but if an official record company is interested in doing it, let me know, because it's the stereo masters exist.
Hmm.
Um, the mono version that's out there is not official.
Hmm.
It's nice it's out there. At least we have it. But if the real one became available, I'd buy it now. Well, I'd interrupt this Zoom and buy it now.
Yes.
Um, but it's not.
The ones that have come out are just almost rarer than hen's teeth. I mean, the Rudolph special has kind of been generally in print in some form over the years, but I
Yeah,
mean, it's like a lot of them. Like, I would have killed to have a single of Heat Miser and Snow Miser on the B side.
yeah,
I think that would have been a killer double-sided hit, and
and
they never put it out. Is it because sometimes the singles don't? Because I know Robert Goulet tried a single on Daydreamer. He sang it a few times on TV, but it flopped.
yeah,
And even the Rudolph, and I have to ask you this: do you have these things?
yeah.
Like the single? Are those?
I don't have the single of Daydreamer,
Oh,
but I do have the
okay.
single of the Ballad of Smokey the Bear,
Oh, okay.
sung by. Well, there's two versions. There's I can't remember who it was. One of those vocal groups like Johnny Mann, but not Johnny Mann. Norman Luboff
Okay.
maybe, but they did do two songs from Ballad of Smokey Bear. were released, and I believe that was epic.
Mm,
And also the Richard Wolf Children's Chorus on RCA Camden
mm,
recorded the
mm.
Ballad of Smokey the Bear. So they popped up here and there, but as far as soundtracks, there was a huge gap. No Drummer Boy
Yeah,
officially, only the
yeah,
promo. And they weren't making as many either. Oh, Cricket in the Hearth. Excuse me, I should remember that, with
yeah.
Marlo and Danny Thomas and Ed
Hmm.
Ames and Abby Elaine. Great score. I love Fish and Chips.
That was a
It's so
legit sound.
Maury Laws.
That was a regular soundtrack, wasn't it? That
That
you
was an
could find in the store.
RCA Victor, and it's actually
Yeah.
on Spotify,
Okay.
which I'm thrilled that is, because that's got terrific songs in it. That's available, and it was released in stereo. So
Okay.
I'm glad that popped in my head. So yeah, that was probably after Rudolph.
Yeah.
That was the second one that I can
Yeah.
recall. And then you had in
Yeah.
1970, you had a Santa Claus. I don't think Frosty was necessarily released when when it was first out. It may have been
Well,
about 69. So
didn't Frosty have two separate soundtracks? One was just the dialogue with June Foray doing the voice of her. Yeah. Which I think aired originally that way, if I'm corrected.
I
Uh,
don't remember. I remember watching it when it was new, and I don't remember June Foray doing
okay.
Karen's voice.
Okay. Okay.
So
Because I've heard that the first airing, but I was 3 years old. I don't know. Was June Foray, and then they changed it for all subsequent airings, but I don't
yeah,
know. And of
yeah.
course,
I don't
but
know if
June
that was a
Foray is
network
on that
thing or
soundtrack album, and there's that one, and then there's another one with a different cover that I guess is just the music. I don't
I
know,
don't
but
recall another one with another
but
cover.
yeah, I'll have to show that to you. But again, all these things are rarer than hen's teeth. I don't know what the story is on Rankin Bass stuff. I mean, they get great ratings, and you can't find this stuff. Um,
Well, there
yeah.
there has never been and this is partially also because um, music is a notoriously difficult thing to license.
Mm,
So it is a major thing that some of this stuff got onto CD. Actually, I produced the first CD that had Chris. It was only 10
hmm.
selections, but that had Rankin Bass stuff
Was
on
that
a
this one?
CD with Hanna-Barbera. It was called Billboard Family Christmas Classics,
Oh, that's a different one. Okay.
and that has an edit of Frosty that I asked them to do that's different from the one that Sony did. Sony came
Okay.
out with
This is the one
Christmas
I have.
Cartoon Christmas Volume 1 and 2.
Okay.
Um,
This is the
that
one I
came
have.
later.
Okay.
Rudolph and Frosty and Friends came out later, but the
Okay.
first one was Bill at least a year earlier, was in like 95, 96, was Billboard Family Christmas Classics, and we had Christmas Time Is Here,
Okay.
which was on CD already, but we added on Frosty the Snowman. I believe that was for the first time.
Mm.
um, we had Coming Up Christmas Time from, actually it was originally in Casper's First Christmas, but it's in Yogi's First Christmas.
Mm.
More it better from that, because they sing it like 6 times, and that's
Right.
because they have 90 minutes to fill.
Let's sing it
And
again.
yeah, yeah. Um, and I'm off the top of my head, We Need a Little Christmas from Mame, that's from the Broadway version, Rio Shiu by the Monkees.
Yeah.
But that one was first, but it only had 10 cuts on it. And
Yeah.
then the Rudolph Frosty one was released with more, and it also included a little bit directly off the soundtrack of Mr. Magoo. Uh,
Hmm.
a couple of things from that. And then the two Nick at Night ones, which had a lot of great stuff. But before that, many of those things weren't available. And that it costs a lot of money, because not only do you have to compensate like the ASCAPs and the BMIs and all that, but you also have to look into union payments, because sometimes things are recorded or presented and they didn't figure that into the budget, commercial
Hmm.
recordings. That's one of the reasons also the Rankin Bass stuff was not for sale, because those records were made for internal use, and um, they weren't licensed so that they could
Mm.
be sold in retail stores. That's a different license. It's like the same thing with Disney attractions. the people would say, why isn't there a soundtrack of this or this show or this attraction? Sometimes they don't add that in at the beginning, and to do it
Yeah.
later, it costs a lot, and it's still
Yeah.
done. Enough
Yeah.
people. Alice in Wonderland was that way. The soundtrack was never available until like 97
Right.
because Decca owned the rights or purchased the rights. They did not release an album, and so it meant that they had to uh, go in, and that's one of the reasons that Tutti Camaradas was made, was because
Ah, okay.
Disneyland Records didn't have access to that without an enormous amount of renegotiation and stuff. So, and the film at the time was not a huge, it's not the classic it's considered now. It was shown on the Disneyland show almost right away. So
Hmm.
they weren't going to put a lot of money into an album of it, so that this magnificent studio version was done. So when people wonder, well, why wasn't there
Yeah.
a soundtrack of this or that? Sometimes
Yeah.
that's the reason.
I guess I was spoiled because it was on Facebook recently. Somebody says, "What's the first album you ever bought as a kid or whatever?" And mine was, I don't know if I bought it, but it's the one that was I got. It was the Sesame Street Book and Record.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I didn't know all these things at age 3, 4, 5. It's like, so, I said, "Hey, why aren't all my favorite shows on record?" And I did get a Mr. Rogers record back then, and but a lot of these TV shows, these Rankin Bass things, nothing.
Hmm.
And I also was one that I liked little toy figures of everything. It's only been like 3 or 4 years ago that I finally got what I wanted when I was a little kid, and they had this little storybook thing with a hardcover that has like 10 little figures of the Rudolph characters. It's like,
Yeah.
where was this in 1971?
It wasn't
It's
because
like,
if you recall, and you probably remember this,
yeah,
the characters of Rudolph and Santa Claus and Frosty the Snowman were fairly generic. And if you
yeah,
got a golden book, you had that version of them. And if you
yeah.
bought a toy, you got that version. The Rankin Bass ones had not taken hold of the beloved position that they're in now.
Oh,
And
yeah,
so
but
now, I mean, we knew,
yeah,
but
yeah,
for the most part, for years, they were just whatever rendition. I think the Max Fleischer Rudolph was kind of a model in a way. He kind of
yeah,
was, but it didn't. It's like there's so many different looks of Santa. The Coca-Cola one is the most well known and everything,
yeah.
but and even in Rankin Bass, Santa looks different in different specials. But there wasn't a
Well,
definitive Rudolph. Um, and it was something that happened over the time, and in the 90s, I believe it was, we didn't have a lot of CVS stores where I lived, so it was a very big deal when the CVS opened, because they were the one of the first to start selling the figurines, the toy sets with the different characters in them.
right.
And I still have a Jessica pen. It's like a Jessica pen, and a plush Jessica. They made toys out of all, but that, just like you, I was waiting for that to
Yeah,
happen. And
yeah.
apparently others were too, because now you can buy a popcorn bucket, with
And
them.
now they have too much stuff, but it's like, I just can kind of look at it and go, huh.
Well, it's, yeah,
Rudolph
you can
candy
fill
bar,
your
okay.
house with it.
Yeah.
And eventually you need to have a place to put, the fridge and the stove and,
Yeah. But it's just funny how it changed from being never merchandise
Yep.
to like saturation point. Like, all right, already.
Well,
It's like,
that's the era we live in. It's, and all of Rudolph is controlled by a Rudolph company, controlled very, very strongly
yeah, I
by
was going to ask you that. I mean, who owns Rudolph? Because I mean, it was a
I believe
song.
it's the Rudolph company.
Okay.
It
Because I
has
mean,
it has its own holding company,
okay.
and that's the other complicated things about Rankin Bass
Yeah.
specials is you've got the Rudolph company owning the character. You
Okay.
have originally, for a while, Lorne Michaels owned the pre 1970 specials, and put the VHSs out on Broadway Video, and they made the Coneheads pilot with uh,
Hmm.
with Lorne Michaels. Then Warner got all the specials from like 1970 on, or maybe 69. Yeah, because Frosty's in there and Drummer Boy 68. But the early ones were
No, I thought the cutoff. Sorry to interrupt and
right.
correct you. I think the difference was in 74.
You're right. You're right. Yeah,
Yeah,
you were
yeah,
without the
because
sequels.
you
Yeah,
got one Frosty in one group, the
yeah,
Universal group, and the other Frosty was always the
that's correct.
Warner Brothers group. And until this, which we keep plugging,
That's right.
never the twain they should meet. They'd have that crummy Frosty Returns that wasn't even a Rankin Bass special
Yeah,
with John
which
Goodman.
was designed to
Yeah,
fill an hour,
yeah,
because the Frosty was always getting huge ratings in that 30-minute
yeah,
segment. And so "Twas the Night Before Christmas" followed it for years, and that got huge ratings. So somebody at CBS must have said, let's put a sequel to Frosty. Well, they already did one on ABC.
yeah,
So, and which is also owned by Warner.
yeah.
So the other Frosty was made, and it's nice, and it not only has John Goodman doing a nice job, but John Goodman had done so many voices by that time when it was like, what's John Goodman? It's Monsters Inc. It's
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, and also a very young Elizabeth, Mad Men, Elizabeth, Peggy. I can remember everything but her last name.
Oh, okay. Well,
The lady
I,
the actress who played she played Peggy, Elizabeth Moss,
oh,
when she
okay.
was a child actor,
Hmm.
plays the young girl. And that's not Karen. It has nothing to do with the other, probably because they couldn't.
Yeah.
And it's nice, but it
Well,
it did it did bother fans.
so explain that. I mean, why is there the Universal stuff and the Warner Brothers stuff? I mean, and what was it originally? What created that change to where different ownership like that?
I think it, well, that's what I was saying, is that Rankin Bass
Mm.
had to sign with whoever would back up it, whether it was General Electric back when sponsors ruled the airwaves, and then later it was co-productions with, for films, it was Embassy Pictures for a while,
Yeah.
and as time went on, whoever owned them just, and when video came out, um, whoever got those rights to those, it was based on who signed contracts for whatever. So yeah, those split. It's like Warner Brothers. Remember what happened for a long
Oh,
time?
the
The
pre 48s, that's right. Yeah.
47s, and
Yeah, yeah.
you know the cartoons
Um
were not combined.
Now, is there anything to do with, behind you, you have Rankin Bass production, but you also have Videocraft listed. Is there anything to do with those two different company names, or it has nothing to
Well,
do with it?
that changed too. Yeah, that's good you bring that up, because Rankin Bass was Videocraft International Limited originally. Then it became Rankin Bass Productions, and then it was a division of Tomorrow Entertainment. Same thing that happened to Hanna-Barbera, with Taft. And
Right.
then later in the 70s, or actually early 80s, when Thundercats, and a lot of people don't realize that was Rankin Bass too,
Yeah.
it was part of Telepictures. So they were
Hmm.
they were associated with so many different companies, and this is an era of intellectual property, or IP. Um, and so the ownership, the acquisitions of things get very complicated,
Hmm.
because you've got to deal with all of these different owners. So it is a Herculean task that
Hmm.
DVD and Blu-ray set was put together, because
Hmm.
they're when a company owns stuff, they want their stuff out
Right.
there. And that's the thing, is that the Rankin Bass stuff is all over the map. Rudolph's owned by a company, but Drummer Boy isn't really owned. The song is licensed, but the character is licensed. It's just like Batman with Fox
Hmm.
owned the 66 series, um, but Warner owned the character. So you have all those complications there. It sort of just fell in, but the public is responding by watching or buying the shows over and over and over again, and kind of telling them, instead of telling us, what they want. And they kind of want the ones they grew up with, and they want to share with their kids. And that's evolved. The power of the public. There's a lot of people out there, and if they all vote with their wallets and say, I want to see this and I'm going to buy it, and then they actually do, instead of just say so,
Hmm.
we do count.
Yes. Now, on this set, you do commentary just on Santa Claus is coming to town. Is that right? Come
Yeah,
into
yeah.
town. Come into
And
town.
I'm in the
Right?
Mark Evanier is on the Frosty the Snowman one,
Okay.
and there's also uh, a 45-minute The Animagic World of Rankin Bass documentary
I
that,
think I have,
that was
yeah, here's
done.
the Blu-ray one that I have also.
Oh
This one
yeah,
only has
yeah,
the five. Yeah, but you're on
yeah,
that one too. So
and that has a lot of the same features.
yeah. So
Um, if you're looking for those features,
yeah.
um, those are the documentary is pretty cool because it has John Favreau
Hmm.
because of Elf. It
Hmm.
has Henry Selick, who did
Hmm.
Nightmare Before Christmas and James and the Giant Peach, which I really love and wish more people knew about. Uh,
Hmm.
and it had Brenda Chapman and Kevin Lima. Um, so many people who were influenced, the Chiodo brothers,
Hmm.
people that were influenced by these specials, and what an impact that they had
Hmm.
on things. So it's nice that that came together
Right.
because it really is all about Rankin Bass and what it's meant
Hmm.
to lots of people and not
Right.
any one person.
Now, when you recorded yours, how did that come about?
Well,
And where did you record
I
it?
was just called and said, you know, we have this last minute thing. Um, would you like to do? And I said, would I? Because it's my favorite. It's my
Yeah.
favorite.
Hmm.
I was asked to come in, and since I have the soundtrack album, that helped me memorize it over the years anyway. I mean, I know that by heart. And I'm
Yeah.
always quoting Mickey Rooney, you know, golly, about the toys. In danger from toys, you know, halt, stop, not me. I mean, he is like off the wall doing that voice, off the wall. And so I made a few notes, but I never looked at them. I just in the car, I played it in my head because I know it so well. And thought
Yeah.
about what am I going to say, and let's face it. I mean, you and everybody listening. I do this on street corners if you want. I could talk about this stuff and just
Yeah.
blather on. So they put you in this studio, you know, with the guy behind the window and all, and with headphones and a microphone, and they have a oh, we're running out of oh, sorry,
Go ahead.
with a microphone and headphones,
Hmm.
and you just look at the nice big screen, and they project it, and I just blabbed for 51 minutes and talked about every detail I possibly could. A lot about the music and the voices. Roby Lester, who just adore and became a friend of the family because of Mouse Tracks. This
Hmm.
lady who thought she was forgotten didn't
Hmm.
realize the fan base she had
Yeah.
just by reading all those Disneyland books over
Hmm.
the years. And then by being the voice of Jessica, she actually had pictures made with her dressed as Mrs. Claus, and she came to this convention and sang the song, and she was overwhelmed with the outpouring of love to her. She had no idea. You know, a lot of
Hmm.
these people didn't. And that's really what's gratifying is these people getting recognized, you know. Roby Lester
Hmm.
being on Wikipedia after, you know, and a lot of it came out of Mousetracks. That makes me so thrilled that
Hmm.
people know who she is. You know, well, there's a section there was no editing in this thing
Hmm.
except once when Jessica comes on screen for the first time, she goes, "Wait, you must not play with toys." Well, I said, "Can you roll it back to the part where she first enters because I want to explain something." And what it was that that's not Roby Lester going, "Wait." That's Joan
Oh.
Gardner. You know, they
Oh.
her in. I
Oh.
don't
Okay.
know
Good. Yeah.
why Roby probably wasn't there. She said she was there at the session with Fred Astaire, but not Mickey Rooney wasn't there and some other stuff. But they just added it and it just doesn't sound like her. You know, so I want
Yeah.
people to notice that's not
I
her. You
I've
know,
noticed that. I didn't even think about it being a different actress. I just said it sounded odd,
odd.
but
Yeah.
now I
Well, the
know.
other
Now I
thing
know.
is
Okay.
the other thing is that I don't know if you saw it in syndication, but he calls the penguin Topper. I'll name you Topper. You know, So just Mickey Rooney, um, all year long, in danger from toy. I'm sorry, I digress. Um,
Still makes me laugh. Anyway.
uh, we'll build ourselves a nice house. Um, he says everything, but I was the number one star in the world. Um, when he names him Topper, that's what I knew. That's what we all knew, and it's on the album that way. When it was syndicated, Paul Frees is going, "I'll call you Waddles," and it's so weird because he doesn't
So
even
that's where
try.
that came from. I was wondering
Yeah.
where that came from. And
Well, I don't know. I can
mhm.
only guess that Topper was a toy company, and maybe that was the reason. Because what's the matter with Topper? Except that Topper was a pretty
It
that
was a
was a big
movie.
deal toy company
Yeah,
for a
and a
long
book.
time. I don't know. I
Three
don't know.
movies actually.
But
So
it
I don't know.
was this
TV
way,
show too.
Waddles.
Yeah.
He wasn't. He didn't even
Well,
try.
at least that solves a mystery. I mean, it's just like, it was Hermie supposed to be Herbie because it really sounds in a couple scenes that they said Herbie than Hermie,
Well,
and
apparently in the script it's Hermie,
okay,
but you never know in sessions
okay,
who was in the room and who was recording. I when the head elf says it, it sounds like Herbie,
yeah, it's when he
and that
comes
kind of
in and
throws it
he's
off.
smashing through the toy, Herbie, like
Yeah,
that. It
not for
really sounds,
you.
yeah.
Finish the job. That's oh gosh, the same as the voice of Yukon Cornelius. That's an actor. I cannot remember his name, but he's bald and he's in a million things. And
Right.
like and he was the co-star on a show called with Sam Groom. He's a Canadian actor. Um, that was about a doctor, a mobile doctor on the go. Um, but I honestly, it's escaping me now. Um, but he was the head elf as well, and they oh gosh, I think I just wonder. It's just like Hermie is spelled Mey sometimes or Mie. It's same as Rosie the robot. I contend that Rosie was always IE until 1985 when the title card, which was done in 1985, spelled it EY. There may have been toys or things that said EY in the early 60s too, but the record album says IE.
Okay, I looked it up just so we could end our brain fart. Larry D. Mann.
Larry D. Mann. Larry
Yes.
D. Mann. Yes. Thank you. One of those people who you see and go, "Oh, I know, I know." And it's funny. He and James Doohan were buddies for a while, and I think in James Doohan's book, about how he doesn't like William Shatner, um, he apparently isn't too kind to Larry Mann either. I think that they kind of had a falling out, but they both were
Hmm.
radio and animation actors, and James Doohan is in the first animated Rankin Bass feature when it was Videocraft, Willie McBean and his Magic Machine, which
Ah,
also didn't have a soundtrack album.
okay.
But I
And I
did.
have never seen. I will say a lot of that early stuff I still have never seen. I'm sure it's out there on bootleg, like we always talk about. But it's like I'd like legit releases. I don't know what's happened to some of these. Maybe they don't think it'll sell, but I don't know. I guess
Well, there
Warner
was an
Archives,
evening.
it wouldn't be that one because that would be the other end. That's the classic media stuff that's Universal. So
They
I
did
don't
a
know.
nice job with The Daydreamer, and that came out on Blu-ray. That was
Yeah.
actually Kino Lorber did a
Oh,
nice
okay.
job. Mad Monster Party, but Wacky World of Mother Goose and the Willie McBean is totally that was I don't even know if that was ever. No, I don't think that
Well,
was ever.
the Mother Goose was on DVD. I did get
Yes,
that.
yes, I do
Yeah.
have that.
But Willie McGee is just like, I mean,
Totally
I know, like,
forgotten. And
yeah.
that wasn't Embassy. That was something called Magna Pictures. So who knows who ended up
Hmm.
inheriting that or absorbing
Yeah.
that, and that's part of the problem, is locating those people, getting them to negotiate. Is it worth it? Will it sell enough? The old called ROI, return on investment. So that's an issue there. But the fact that they made it makes it kind of cool, and it's a neat story. I saw it at a matinee. It was on the big screen. A
Yeah.
matinee. It was so exciting
Yeah.
to see it. But uh,
Because I wanted it as my goal to get all the ones with the little figures, all the specials and everything. And then I realized that early stuff is just MIA. So, oh well.
Well,
I
it's
got
the
everything
same
I
with,
think for
like we
Rudolph
said, with
Volcano.
the songs and the
I even got
soundtracks. You know, I don't think you're going to see the complete music of Rankin Bass specials. I'm never going to say never because look, this set came out, but I don't know that the with
I
full
want it out
song,
now. Come on. I
you
want it
know,
now. Come on.
no. Daddy, I want one. I want a CD like that. All right, Baruka.
On second thought, I don't. No. You're doing voices, and I know we're running out of time, but we'll rejoin in a couple of seconds. You're doing voices of like Mickey Rooney, but I always like Paul Frees's voice. It's like you're breaking your own law.
That's very good. Yeah.
Well, it's just that he does that. What's the actor's name? You know, he
Oh,
talked like that.
that's Eric Blore.
Eric
That I
Blow.
know.
You know,
Yeah.
I love him. I didn't even know, honestly, that that's what Paul Frees was imitating originally. You know, until years later, I saw like probably some Fred and Ginger movie or
Hmm.
Fancy Pants or something, and I go, oh
Top
my
hat
god,
he's in.
yeah, it's
And he's
top
also
hat,
he's
and I
also
go,
in
oh my
he's
god,
Mr.
he's the
Toad.
guy that he's Inspector Fenwick, you know, because I know Paul Frees would use the same voice on a lot of different characters, you know,
He's
it's
Mr.
just
Toad
natural.
in
Yeah.
Ichabod Mr. Toad.
So anyway, but you know, it's like those were I love the Paul Frees voices, and it's like, oh, yo yo, yeah, I love. Anyway,
Well, I managed to save one little toy. And we ought to just act it out.
yeah, well, let's do our own version. We'll do a live version right here. That's our next podcast. We're gonna re-record Santa Claus is coming to town. Now somebody else is gonna have to do Julie or whatever her character's name.
Yeah, that would be funny. That would
Yeah.
be so funny.
There's always two. Oh, that's on Rudolph. Sorry, wrong special. What is the song? Oh, Jessica. That's her name. What is the song Jessica sings
Oh,
again?
My
I never
World is
remember.
Beginning Today,
That's
which
right.
is so psychedelically groovy, and then the birds take out her bun. Robbie Lester had perfect pitch, and it's such a showcase for how she sang for Ava Gabor in the Aristocats and in the Rescuers. She sang in the song Guantanamera by the Sandpipers. When
Wow.
they're and the words mean she's the one who she's singing it in Spanish while they're she her voice was in a lot of things. She did a lot of looping as well. There's an episode of That Girl where
Yeah.
Donald is sitting down I think to lunch with a young lady and hey, Robbie Lester's voice is coming out of her,
Hmm.
and things like that. She was very busy in that era. And that song is so wild and 70s, and they go into the 2D animation, and
Hmm.
it's so groovy and hypnotic, and then they do the classic Hollywood, woman takes out the bun, and not as up, as uptight. There's a scene in
Yeah.
Pollyanna where Jane Wyman does that. She's sitting at the mirror,
Yeah.
undoes the bun, and brushes
Hmm.
her hair. That's what that means. So she's and then at the end, I love it. She's singing to like a photograph of herself in the
Oh
pond.
yeah.
You know, and then she looks very, very anime. She has the square nose that comes
Oh
together.
yeah.
You know. But
I thought
Roby,
it was weird that it went to the flat animation. I mean, was there a reason for that? Did they make a
I think it
mistake and they
was.
said, "Oh crap," and so then they said, let's just do some cell animation. We can't get the figures again or something,
I don't know. I don't think so. I think it was just a
or just
design
to
of
be
the
different.
song to
Okay,
take it away and to break it up,
okay,
because that's the ballad number that might not keep the kids, as interested, so they have to keep it moving and keep something going on. And this
yeah,
is 69 70. This was made. This is when
yeah,
Filmation was doing it with Archie songs and the
that's true.
Banana Splits with Hanna-Barbera. They were using that sort of thing. Disney didn't really do that, um, just go somewhere. I mean, I'm not talking Fantasia and that kind of thing, but taking a song in a film and totally going into a graphic look until really Lion King. I just want to be
Well,
king.
I think Aristocats they did, is that
Well,
everybody wants to be a cat
they,
goes into multicolors. It's around that same
but they
time as
didn't
this
leave
special.
completely.
So
Didn't leave the
yeah, I
scene
guess so. Yeah,
completely.
yeah.
Where Man Called Flintstone did. They they
Yeah.
uh, they the songs in Man Called
No, you've left
Flintstone.
completely. When you bent over, you left completely.
Well, I did because I got to plug in. But a Man
Yeah.
Called Flintstone, the spy type guy, and teammates and Tickle Toddle, they go off into different graphic looks and are quite impressive and fun. But
Hmm.
it wasn't done much in animated shows and features as often. Alice in Wonderland, What's a Nice Kid Like You? That has some of that. We talked about how it was sort of reminiscent of Hong Kong Fooey's transformation scene where he's jumping in the alley, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
But Rankin Bass
Hmm.
did it occasionally. Rudolph's Shiny New Year. When he tells the
Hmm.
story of Rudolph, because Rudolph was too shy to tell his own story, so he had the trees and tell them in the wind. I can't say Happy New Year without saying Happy New Year, the baby
God bless.
and a
Anyway.
gust of wind blew the New Year.
It is funny that Rankin Bass would pick some of these people, but I think that, they probably did pick their own favorites after a while. They just said, "Hey, let's get Red Skelton for this one. Hey, let's get
Yeah,
so and so for this."
and it was a
So
welcome thing for viewers who loved these people because they appeared occasionally, maybe on talk shows and things, but they didn't
yeah,
not all that much. So Red Skelton had been canceled by the time
yeah,
that Shiny New Year came on, and he had essentially sort of retired. And Fred Astaire, I think Finian's Rainbow, he announced he wasn't going to dance anymore in a film. That was
yeah,
68. And maybe in That's Entertainment too, he did a little bit.
yeah,
And he was making like the Amazing Dobermans and things like that in the 70s. So
yeah,
it was nice to these were welcome. I mean, seeing Shirley Booth so much longer after Hazel, that was kind of a. And Angela
yeah.
Lansbury was known more for her stage and her early
Hmm.
screen appearances. And to those of us who love Bedknobs and Broomsticks,
Hmm.
but that really wasn't the smash that Mary Poppins was. So Angela Lansbury's fame at the time was for Sweeney Todd and for
Yeah,
Mame and things like that, you know. And
yeah,
and they would use Broadway people a lot too, especially in that period because Dinty Doyle, the actor who was Dinty Doyle in the Leprechauns, he was in Sweeney Todd.
yeah.
So quite a few of the actors they would bring in were stage. Peggy Cass. We hadn't seen
Yeah.
Peggy Cass in a while.
Yeah. Well, you
you
talked
know.
about New York voice actors. I mean, one we haven't mentioned is right here. Jangle
Oh,
Bell. He was Bradley Polkey, who
hmm,
was another total television person, but he was totally a New York guy.
yep.
So, he did the new cast for cartoon show.
Hmm.
He did the first Family album. All these things recorded in New York. So, he never really ventured out to the West Coast. I don't think ever in his life, because that's where he was doing all his recording. So, you know,
Well,
he was,
that's the same with Alan Swift, who also,
yeah,
there's another real versatile actor, and he did a lot of voices in Year Without a Santa Claus. They tended to do a primarily New York, Canadian, or LA casting with their specials, but
yeah,
in Year Without, and Twas the Night Before Christmas, he does Santa, he does, and Bob McFadden is in that as well. So, but Alan
yeah,
Swift carries almost all the voices in Mad Monster Party. He's like the Paul
yeah,
Frees of the East Coast, because he's doing
yeah,
so many voices. And he was someone you heard a
right,
lot, and it's kind of nostalgic to
yeah,
hear now. And he was a Broadway actor. A lot of these people were largely staged. They do commercials, and things and voiceovers, but they were largely stage actors.
And Swift did a lot of stuff for Total Television too. I mean,
Right.
so yeah, again, New York, all New York stuff. So
Yeah,
yeah,
wasn't that at the studio? It says at the end of King Leonardo, the studio that Aura or something, where that Howard Stern's father owned.
yeah, or Audio Studios or whatever it is. Yeah, Ben Stern was the person behind that, which he just passed away and like at the age of 99 or something
Wow.
recently, but he was still around, and I used to wonder why, Howard Stern had this connection to with this strange lady who wore a costume, the underdog lady in the old days, and then I realized, oh, his dad recorded all this stuff, so that makes sense. So
What, you
anyway,
mean Norma McMillan?
so no, not no. Ben's no. Underdog lady was this probably this just transient person that dressed up in an odd uh flowing outfit, really kind of vaguely resembled Underdog, but he used to have her on the show, on his TV show back in the 90s, and it's like,
Oh,
why is he having this crazy lady, who has nothing to do with the real Underdog on his show? And then I realized, oh, his dad recorded the audio tracks for Underdog and everything else. So you know he's giving her some airtime just because of that, which is kind of strange, but that's Howard Stern for you. So
well,
anyway,
David Letterman, when he
uh,
was on NBC, would have quite often would have offbeat, not just Larry Bud Melman, but offbeat
yeah,
guests. He had Princess Gloria,
yeah,
who I don't know who she was, and he I think he was one of the first people to book Brother Theodore a lot. And
yeah.
he didn't make
And he used to
sense.
have
He was
Chris
just
Elliott a lot.
yeah, but Brother Theodore was Gollum. And
Yeah.
much as I like the Peter Jackson versions, you know, how much maybe Andy Serkis never saw the animated version, but it's just Gollum. Maybe it's just the only way to do Gollum. But when Brother Theodore talks on
Yeah.
Dave, that's him.
Hmm.
What a unforgettable performance.
Hmm. All right. Once again, we're straying off topic, but we'll bring it back
Well, no,
in
we're
on a
not, because
regular
that's
day.
that's
No.
Rankin Bass.
Oh,
That's
okay. Oh,
we
that's true. That's
you
true.
know
But I wanted to finish up our show though a little more on Santa Claus is coming to town, just because that's the one you did the commentary on. Uh, my it, it's your favorite, but I don't know if you really explained why. I mean, you like Mickey Rooney's voice, but is that the real and what he
yeah,
says? I mean,
Mickey Rooney, I don't know,
now
but
I will
Mickey
say for myself, it's probably number one or number two. Number one might be Year Without Santa Claus for me. So,
it's my favorite for a number of reasons. One is
mhm,
that I I think it may have been my first Rankin Bass record, that and Frosty. And
mhm,
Santa Claus has I love Frosty, but this has a full score. It has all these great voices. It has so much of what I love in it. Uh,
mhm,
Roby Lester, Paul Frees, Joan Gardner. It has the Mike Sam singers, which they did a ton of Disney albums. I love their specific sound, and it's them. They were on Tomfoolery too.
mhm.
That they went under many names. And so on Tomfoolery, no, actually the Mad Comedians, it says
Oh
the
yeah.
Moral Law Singers. They had no problem with that. They could be whatever you wanted to call them, but it was the Mike Sam singers. So it has them. I listened to that album all the time. I loved
Mhm,
that album. I didn't
mhm.
stop with Christmas because hey, makes you happy, great music.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons. I also feel like that's when they had found, and it was Maury Laws's favorite too.
Mhm,
They were firing on all cylinders. They were all over Saturday morning. They had perfected the animated Christmas special, the
mhm.
look, the animation, uh, herky jerky as it could be. It all worked perfect. And Romeo Muller had created this completely made up fiction that probably a lot of people think is part of the legend. I mean, that's the other thing Rankin Bass gave us is several legends that are just part of what we think, just as
Mhm,
much as different cultures and communities gave us the different parts of Christmas, they're part of the whole now. So
Hmm.
that's part of it too. I
Hmm.
love the songs. I love every millisecond of that show. I mean, I love a lot of like I mentioned, the first Christmas Snow. I love The Hobbit. Hobbit means a lot to me personally. Uh,
Hmm.
the Greatest Adventure is a great song. I love The Daydreamer. Daydreamer, they weren't ready to make, and it has issues as a feature, but
Hmm.
and so as a whole, it has issues. But what a score! First Laws and Bass score. Um,
Right.
what a cast! What an overwhelming attempt to do something they had no money to do. You
Hmm.
know, it was way too over. They're way too over their heads, but it's still cool. And it could be terrible, and it's actually quite watchable. It was on TCM. They had a night of Rankin Bass on TCM,
Wow.
and they showed The Daydreamer, Wacky World of Mother Goose, and Mad Monster Party. And you had Ben Mankiewicz talking about them as the classics they are. And I thought, well, that's quite nice. So
Mhm.
call me when they do the Hanna-Barbera night. And, you know,
Well, I guess you could.
you could easily do that.
Charlotte's Web, Man Called
Charlotte's Web,
Flintstone,
Mankel
Heidi's
Flintstone, Hey There, It's
Song.
Yogi Bear, and Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you ever so much.
All right,
Because it's
TCM
on
people.
Boomerang. It's on Boomerang with no fanfare. It just pops up.
Yeah,
And so it's licensed for something. I
yeah.
think they could do very well to look into restoring it and putting it on Max and promoting it as the law special that most of you haven't seen with Fred and Barney in it,
Hmm.
and a score by the people who made Bye Bye Birdie, and one of them wrote Annie. This is not to be just tossed aside. I think people would love.
I'm surprised that they never have put it like as just a bonus on any reissue of the Flintstones all these years. It's
Yeah,
like, here's a rare appearance by them.
yeah,
That
it should be part of the. But and it is kind of cool. She falls in her TV set and she finds the friend Barney.
Yeah, and it's the well, it might not be the only time, but it is one time where you have both Freds, both original Freds
That's
doing the
true.
voice. It's
You have
Alan
both
Reed and
threads.
Henry
Well,
Corden.
you know when else you have that? You have it in Man Called Flintstone, but you also have, and this is probably, I know this is on YouTube, the Conservation Energy special,
Oh yeah.
where Fred is talking about, insulating your water heater and stuff. And they turned it into like a 1 minute PSA, and suddenly it's Henry Corden. Let's sing a song about conservation energy. Good times, good times.
All right. Yeah, one person you didn't imitate, now I'm dragging it back to Santa Claus again, is Keenan Wynn. We haven't really talked
Oh,
about him.
that's
It's
another.
like,
Oh,
yeah,
sorry,
you got to do an
I hit
imitation of
something.
him if you can.
That's another great character and perfect voice. And
Mhm.
uh, who doesn't identify with this guy, who is like, he's just you just they had the that was the other thing they had down. The shows hold up also because they were very conscious of the audience being very young children. And even though I remember my little sister being a little scared, with the Bumble Snow Monster, just a
Yeah,
little bit, there'd be
yeah.
a little tiny bit. You would always have the reform villain. It was almost I think it was Maury Laws saying to Jules Bass, "We're kind of doing Dickens here, aren't we?" Because
Yeah.
he said, and we always ended the shows like three times. The story would end, and then it would end, and then it would end. You know,
Yeah. Well,
and
I'll
then there
say,
was always that tag with the title song and the credits.
as a 3-year-old, I think the very first appearance of Winter Warlock is pretty unnerving. I don't know if it really scared me as much as, oh my God, this
It
guy
is. He's very
is
scary.
yeah, it's
But
like,
that's what my dad, I don't know if I say this in the commentary, but it's what my dad used to teach me as a kid. When you have his dream, try to make friends with it. Try to
yeah,
laugh with try to turn the dream around when you get
uh,
scared. And that's
yeah,
kind of what they do. They take these villains and long before Maleficent and all these the other side of the bad guy kind of things,
yeah,
you find out that there's a that's all he knew. He lived by himself. He was lonely. He was cranky.
Yeah.
and he just wanted to be loved and accepted and wanted to contribute,
Yeah.
and he was kind of like he's reformed.
Yeah.
It's rehabilitation, and bring him into the community and welcome him, and then maybe he won't be a problem. It's very it's very childlike and might be a little naive. Can't we just get along? Well,
Yeah.
obviously we can't, but in the context of a special, that's the other thing about Santa Claus is Coming to Town. I forgot to mention. That's the only special that ends with a very pointed sequence about why Christmas and Santa and all of these things are important,
Yeah.
because it goes into all what we all do. I can't take much more of the pressure. I've got this to do. I've got that to do. Christmas
Mhm.
is Christmas is a bother. The noise of the crowds. I really wish
Yeah.
it were outlawed. And
Yeah.
then Fred Astaire looks at us and starts explaining,
Hmm.
isn't it worth it? Aren't some of these things worth? I'm getting the chills.
Do,
I'm sorry talking about because
do,
I
do, do you think Charlie Brown Christmas with Linus's speech kind of paved the way for that?
absolutely.
Okay. All
It
right.
owes everything to that. And
Yeah,
then
because I mean,
we're
prior to that,
terrified of that.
Rudolph certainly didn't have any religious overtones at
No,
all.
no, well,
And Frosty,
they
no, not really. It's like
and that's another thing. We have to always be
or
cognizant of
spiritual overtones,
everybody's.
I should say, spiritual more than
Well, we have to be
religious. Yeah,
cognizant of everybody's beliefs and how everybody
yeah,
celebrates, and everybody celebrates. A lot of people celebrate different things.
yeah,
This special toes the line so beautifully, you
yeah,
know, without feeling like it's compromised, and they didn't compromise the message, and yet it's inclusive, because
yeah.
when they get married, they chose the holiest night of the year,
Right,
Christmas Eve, but there isn't anything more said about it than
right,
that, because we know that that
right,
night isn't really necessarily when Jesus was born either. So
right.
the adults watching see they're getting that it is Santa is the pagan version, is the non-religious aspect of Christmas. It's worked in so gently, which
Yeah,
good
yeah,
goodness, putting this sort of thing in gently is an art form that doesn't always come across well, and we've seen
yeah,
that in a lot of things where it's like, I
yeah,
know you're meanwhile and you're trying to explain this, but put the sledgehammer away.
yeah. Well, if there was ever a time 1970, if there was ever a time to do it, that would probably be the time,
Exactly.
because I don't think they ever did that again. You go to your Year Without a Santa Claus, you go to your Jack Frost. I don't think they had, except maybe what's that one called? The First Christmas or something?
Story of the First
That,
Christmas Snow.
yeah, that, and then of course Nestor and the Drummer
Yeah, there's a
Boys. But
little
I mean,
more of
they
nativity
they
in the
kind
half
of
hours.
steer clear of all that stuff, and just
Yeah.
stick with the Santa, for the most part,
Yeah, there are very few that the half hours usually do more of the nativity based kind of stories. But the other thing about Santa Claus is Coming to Town is because it was 1970 and we were in the midst of Vietnam and the Nixon
Yeah.
administration, and gosh, the country being torn in half. What's that like? You know, that message is extremely powerful, and when you look at the the whole story of Chris in this, the fact that he's an outlaw, the fact that he's breaking the law of established by a government, there is
Mhm.
some political things in there too. He's like Robin Hood of old. He's
Yeah.
called.
Not
It is a
me.
you just can't resist.
I know. It just
Pretty
fit.
grand, eh? It's perfect. Well, since I'm a Kringle,
You do a good Mickey Rooney. If we ever do
I,
the radio re-recording play, we gotta have you as the
yeah,
Mickey Rooney Santa.
I was talking about the other day. I was talking the other day about I don't know how it came up, but the completely insane commentaries he does on the Twilight Zone DVDs.
Mm.
I mean, he's incoherent and yelling at people, and but on screen he's also going, I can't fit in my clothes. I want to
Uh,
be big. I want to be
uh,
big.
Uh,
If you put him and William Shatner in the same thing, I think there'd be a tectonic shift and
oh
the
no.
world would crumble.
I'm surprised. Yeah, they never got Shatner for one of these Rankin Bass specials. I suppose if they kept making him, they probably would have gotten to him at some
Well,
point.
if they kept making them, yeah, but his career was sort of he was doing the animated Star Trek, but doing voices in anything wasn't what it's considered now. And
Yeah.
he later did voices in other lots of other things. And one of my favorite animated things he did was doing the end credits of Buzz Lightyear of Space Command,
Oh
the
yeah.
direct to
Hmm.
video to it
Hmm.
to infinity and beyond. It's great. It's hysterical.
Well, at this point, where is Rankin Bass as a company? Is it just owned by the assets are owned by Universal and by Warner Brothers? And I
Well,
know, I think, did Jules Bass pass away? I should know
yeah,
this.
he passed
Okay,
away
okay,
quite recently,
okay.
and he had all gone on to be an author. He wrote a
Hmm.
couple of novels. He
Okay.
actually wrote a novel that was made into a Selena Gomez movie,
Hmm.
uh, uh, called Headhunters. I don't
Hmm.
think the name of the movie was the same, but yeah, his name's based on the book by Jules Bass
Hmm.
on that. And but there is no Rankin Bass Productions in
Yeah.
existence today. There is no such thing as a Rankin Bass Productions.
Okay.
However, they do have there are heirs, and they do have there is a legal entity in
Mm.
somewhere, I believe, in probably in New York, that represents the interests of what was Rankin Bass
Okay.
Productions.
So do
Uh,
they have to be consulted anytime they put out, say, a
well,
collection like
Jules
this?
was.
Okay.
Jules
So.
was he actually was consulted on the materials. I mean, I didn't meet him, but Universal did want to get his approval on who was going to be involved and who was not going to be involved with
Okay.
it. And they felt it was just in some ways it was kind of nice to find out that I hadn't met the executives. I was just told this by the production people and the producer. Um, that they respected and wanted to honor his wishes as far as that, because he was the last vestige of that. I mean, Peter is still around and he worked for them, but you know, Jules Bass was Rankin Bass. So yes,
Yeah.
he was given approval. What came out on there is is what Bass wanted, and what is not is what he didn't want. Put it that way.
Okay. Fair enough. All
I
right.
mean, that is the honest truth.
Hmm.
That's as far as I can go, but that's the honest truth.
Yeah.
That may be the last thing related to their work that he consulted on. I mean, both of these were people who were very visionary and wanted to look at the next project,
Right.
and wanted to see what was coming next. It wasn't always a look back kind of thing. That's one of that's the way Walt Disney was. What's
Yeah.
Barbera was, what can I sell so that we can keep the studio going? And Hannah was saying, what can you sell to keep the studio going? So so people are still working. So they
Hmm.
were always looking to the next thing, and they didn't always want to repeat themselves. Sometimes they were forced to.
Yeah.
Barbera would go in with a lot of new ideas too. It's not that they were always repeating themselves; it's that they were expected to.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you have to, you got to fill the coffers
Yeah.
sometimes.
Well, I'm sure by the time they got to the Life Adventures of Santa Claus in '85, they probably said, "We've done everything. What else is there to do?"
Well,
You know.
and yeah, and they had started doing the epic fantasies and
Yeah.
plus Thundercats, because Life and
Oh yeah.
Adventures is the most Thundercat-ish of
Yeah.
all of their specials, because it's the same exact cast. Plus, the great Alfred Drake probably
Hmm.
was retired too. He was the biggest name in the special, and he was in Kismet and all of these classic Broadway shows. He was in
Hmm.
Oklahoma. So that's a giant of the stage, and people not necessarily know him from other things. But that was the same people who were Lion-O, and it was Bob McFadden and,
Hmm.
Lynn Lipton, and I mean, that was a great cast on
Hmm.
Thundercats, and it was just a handful of people
Yeah.
doing them, and it was kind of cool because if you love Thundercats the way I do, it's like, it's Panthro, it's
Yeah. 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 Well,
It was a good special, but was very, very different than
yeah,
the other ones. So it was an evolving thing, just like all companies evolve and do new things and move on to new territories. But it is a body of work, considering how small the company is. Um, it's a body of work that a whole studio may not have been able to boast. It really is a one of a kind entity.
yeah. And especially, I keep holding this up, the 20-year period, 64 to 85, 21-year period, was probably when they're at their peak, it's like
Yeah.
just what they did, even though they had successes after and a few before, it's just, you know,
And the other reality of animated holiday specials, and people say, well, why don't they show this or that anymore? Is, well, the number one reason is they're accessible in so many other ways. That's one reason. But the other reason is commerce again. The specials were on just watch the Macy's parade. They're there to sell the holiday offerings, the new movies, the new toys, the
right.
new whatevers. Parker Brothers sponsored Santa Claus is Coming to Town. There were a lot more toy and game commercials back then. And
Hmm.
as by 1985, you had the Cartoon Network. No, maybe you didn't. No, you didn't have the
Not
Cartoon
not
Network,
yet,
but you had home video. By
yes.
then, a lot of people were getting VHS and beta machines.
Hmm.
The world was starting to change, and what advertisers were buying was different by 85. So
Yeah.
the need for those specials was changing.
I
And
believe Rudolph and Santa Claus is Coming to Town and a couple others probably made their debuts around that time on VHS, if I remember
yes,
correctly.
yeah, and they
Because
they
I know
had
I
those.
snapped them up, and then
It
I've
was the
rebought
Broadway
these things
video.
like about 5, 6 times over my lifetime.
Me too.
It's,
Me too. It's like
it's like,
Mark Evanier says, how many times are they going to make me buy Goldfinger again?
yeah,
No, but it's true. They had those. They had the Christmas wrapping boxes originally. Those were the first ones,
yeah,
and it was very, very exciting.
yeah,
I think Rudolph was one of the first things that when we got a VHS recorder that I recorded,
yeah.
because now I can watch it all the time.
Yeah, because I recorded them off the air prior to that, but by the mid '80s, they were starting to cut scenes. We mentioned Jessica's song on some Santa Claus is Coming to
Yeah,
Town. That got the cut a lot,
yeah.
by the '80s, just for time more than the song was bad, but it probably had something to do with that for some people, I suppose. That's a boring song, take it out. But, more likely it's like, hey, we can put 3 more ads in here, it's like, okay.
Well, that was a reality with musicals too, because I was in a recording session uh, in Orlando. But there was a guy we went into another booth, and a technician was editing Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Mhm.
And it was for the magical world of Disney. Disney was showing other movies that weren't Disney on that, just like the Disney Channel showed the Man Called Flintstone. They didn't
Right.
always just show Disney. And he told me he was cutting songs out, and Truly Scrumptious was one of them.
Mm,
And I said, "Oh, really?" He says, "Well, it's got to fit that time slot and then the
yeah.
commercials." And so the
Yeah.
first thing to go are the songs.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh, golly. I'm sure the first one was this lovely, lonely man that she sang
Yeah.
in the garden, because she was doing the same thing Jessica was doing, singing
Yeah.
about the man she loves, but it didn't
Yeah.
get all groovy.
Yeah.
You know,
Or the one I can think of, obviously, Willy Wonka, Cheer Up Charlie gets
everybody
cut,
picks on Cheer Up Charlie,
Yeah.
and
And
that's, yeah,
I love that song. So
I do too.
anyway. All right. Well, wrapping up here, so we don't have to go to another iteration of this meeting. We go over and over and over. Is I guess I don't know. Is there a future for Rankin Bass? What do you think it's going to go? Just more and more collections, more and more compilations.
Well,
Uh,
it's
it,
like Jerry Beck. I often quote Jerry Beck: "The great stuff endures. The great stuff continues. It survives.
mhm,
Changes and decisions and all that stuff. And if there's something wonderful about it, even it doesn't even have to be something that was even popular at the time. If it just is, there's something wonderful about it, it lives on. So this stuff's going to live on in various forms. That's for sure.
yeah.
As far as remakes, there have been some nice attempts.
Hmm.
But what you can never make the lightning in the bottle happen again. So, you
Yeah.
have to have the more, it's just like Looney Tunes. There's been a lot of really good revivals, and that But all of it, but it's not Termite Terrace anymore. See, and it's
Yeah.
not Carl Stallings with the Warner Brothers Orchestra. You can only go so far to duplicate precisely what, and tastes change. But even though tastes change, what's inherent in these specials doesn't have to change. People
Yeah.
still like them, even if they're not modern by modern standards, as far as the contemporary sounds that we're hearing and all. That's
Hmm.
okay. They still get accepted. And Christmas
Hmm.
sort of is the time when they make an exception to what necessarily. I mean, there's pop versions of songs, and that's fine, but you're still hearing Bing Crosby and Ray Conniff and
Hmm.
all that stuff. Christmas sort of breaks the rules. And that's one of the
Hmm.
reasons they'll live on and on too.
Hmm. And of course, if you were ever asked to do more commentaries or something, you'd probably be right there, ready to help
Uh,
them out.
natural, naturellement, as they
Yes.
say. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, I can do those things, and I can just, except when somebody goes, wait, then I have to stop the
All right. I don't know what note to leave that on, but there we go.
tape.
As
Well, we should
always.
end with twang, boom.
Now, how did they record that? I guess it has a little bongo
There's a
drums
little
in.
bongo. There's a twang. I think the twang must be because I think Maury Laws was a guitarist in a lot of
Okay.
orchestras and stuff. So that's
There's some
probably what twang's
flutes.
there for.
I have to think about it. It has some flutes in there and it has a little bongo drum and
Some trombones probably for the boom.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, what a
Very, very,
memorable tag.
yeah. And then it took me years. I'm pointing to you in the wrong way. The R in the B is represented on there,
Yeah.
because the R is a lowercase r, and then the B is like the two circles is like a B, or the whole thing is like a B. And I go, that's really clever. But it took me years to figure that one out,
That's
because,
like a Saul Bass kind of thing. No
right.
relation.
Yeah. So I thought that's very clever of them. It's like 31 flavors. It's like if you look at it, it looks like a 31, and then it looks like a BR, if you look at the thing a different way.
Yeah.
So anyway. All right. Well, thank you again, Greg. We'll do it again sometime about some other subject. Who knows what? Or we could just do
Always
that
a pleasure, Mark.
the
It's
radio
always really.
show of Santa Claus is coming to
Yeah,
town.
we could just reenact it. Do it like on Monty Python. This is a reenactment.
uh, was you better not shout. You better not cry. You better not shout. I'm telling you what.
Too tall. Merry Christmas.
Tutti tut tut
Ba-dum.
and rummy tum tum. The little stiff, the little kids. Anyway, all right, I'm getting silly. So, all right, well, pleasure talking to you. This will be up sometime in December, and we will talk to you soon.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
And that ends another Fun Ideas podcast. This has been Mark Arnold, your host, and we'll see you next time.